Coming up next, The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy. Every Thursday from 4 p.m, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
People are struggling to have conversations and connect with others that they don't completely agree with on every topic. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that we need to try and solve, is how after all this division and after all this separation do we end up bringing people together again, and what does unity really look like?
New Zealand faces some pretty big issues. First one is COVID and the aftermath. There's no getting away from that. Second is racial division. It's been ginned up and it's dangerous. Another issue that maybe people haven't got their head around yet is digital currency. What form does that take? Is it programmable? Will it be used to manipulate behaviour and patterns of behaviour? Those questions need to be asked and answered.
How can you have fair, open, democratic government by people who are appointed? It's a ridiculous idea. And if that idea is taken to its zenith, then this country is in real trouble, because democracy, one person, one vote, where every vote is of equal value, has got to be the foundation of a modern New Zealand.
What's true, what's not true, how our kids are to be educated. And, I have a great fear for the future. I think we know from history where this could end up.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Welcome to The Crunch on Reality Check Radio. I'm your host, Cam Slater, and this is the place we crunch the political issues and cut through the politicians' spin. Are you ready for some fireworks? First up, I'll catch up with a show favourite, John Banks, on a wide range of topics, and you never know what Banksy will say, so expect the unexpected. And then I'm going to have a chat with Simon O'Connor, who used to be the MP for Tamaki when he lost to Axe Brooke Van Velden, and I'm going to ask him why, as a free speech advocate, he didn't go and speak to the protesters at Wellington. It'll be interesting to see what he has to say about that. And then, of course, we'll hear from Cam's buddies and see what they've got to say about the Serious Fraud Office losing a third case, and whether or not what the Serious Fraud Office did amounts to political interference. And, of course, we'll have the mailbag to get your feedback. Don't forget to send comments to inbox@Reality Check Radio or text to 2057. Now I want to talk about a clear case of election interference. And I'm talking about the Serious Fraud Office and their various cases that they've taken against political parties. On Tuesday, the Serious Fraud Office lost their appeal in the Court of Appeal in the long-running New Zealand First donations case. This is the third case the Serious Fraud Office has lost, and it's not surprising that they tried to shoehorn the Electoral Act offences into criminal charges. But the Court of Appeal was having none of that, and now Winston Peters is seeking an apology for their behaviour. The Serious Fraud Office lost the case regarding to the Labour Party donations and the National Party donations, and now they've lost the New Zealand First donations case, all for pretty much the same reasons. The Serious Fraud Office was trying to charge people under a Crimes Act offence for what were actually Electoral Act offences. The Serious Fraud Office appealed against the findings in the High Court against the acquittal of the two men who handled the donations to the New Zealand First Foundation, and the Court of Appeal dismissed that appeal. A clearer case of election interference cannot be found. The Serious Fraud Office announced this action just ahead of the 2020 election, an election that saw the Labour Party win an outright majority. Well, who stood to benefit from knocking New Zealand First out of Parliament? Well, the Labour Party, obviously. The media also inserted themselves into the debate. They were donkey deep telling us what they wanted to happen to these two men and to Winston Peters rather than telling us the facts of the case. And the facts are now perfectly clear, having been tested in the High Court and now in the Court of Appeal. The Serious Fraud Office was wrong and have been told repeatedly that they were wrong. But that didn't stop the media running endless smear campaigns against New Zealand First, most notably by Radio New Zealand and Stuff. They and every other legacy media outlet participated in the denigration of New Zealand First and Winston Peters at the height of the 2020 election campaign. Understandably, Winston wants an apology. In light of the judgment, the Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, issued a statement. He says, for the third time since April 2020, New Zealand First has defeated the Serious Fraud Office and all those complicit in a malicious attack against a political party going about its lawful business in a lawful manner. Peters also said that the April 2020 attack by the Serious Fraud Office dramatically affected New Zealand First's public image. And he's not wrong. He said New Zealand First is out of pocket by hundreds of thousands of dollars after defending itself in court. And New Zealand First deserves an apology from those individuals in the complicit media for their relentless, venomous, biased and politically motivated attacks directly prior to and for the years following the 2020 election. Peters said that the Court of Appeal's ruling reinforced that there was no wrongdoing. And he says, we want an apology. An apology is the least he and his party should receive. But I would have thought that a sacking of the head of the Serious Fraud Office would be a more appropriate outcome, perhaps a disbandment of the Serious Fraud Office or devolving them back into the police, or some sort of sanction for pursuing forlorn prosecutions, not just in this case, but in the other cases as well. The Serious Fraud Office went political, and now they have egg all over their faces, and the victims of their ill-advised crusade are now in positions of power and influence, and they can exact utu. There is no place in New Zealand for the sort of electoral interference and lawfare we are seeing in the United States, but here it is, right here in New Zealand. The Serious Fraud Office should be ashamed of themselves, but they won't show an ounce of contrition, I would bet. Perhaps it is a case where they should be disbanded. Last time Banksy was on the show, it was very, very popular. Heaps of comments. So I'm going to catch up with him about what has been going on since we last spoke in November and what he thinks are the important issues that we should focus on for the future of our nation. Banksy is back and he's on the line now. Welcome back to The Crunch, John Banks. We last spoke on the 9th of November, just after the election, and you were very ebullient back then about the coalition government and what we were going to get. Are you still happy with what you saw at the election?
Happy is not an operative word that I would use in this confluence. Quietly confident, slightly optimistic, thinking it through carefully and hopeful are the three words that I would use. So I went to Wellington on invitation from some of the young backbenchers, and I listened to their maiden speeches for 2 days. I spoke to the ACT Party caucus, and I listened to many maiden speeches. And I left Wellington the following afternoon quietly pleased and relatively optimistic about the country's future. But let's back up the bus, Whale. Yeah. We had the worst administration in history ruling over us subjects like there was no tomorrow. These were bad people, this Ardern Labor government, very bad people. I'll give you 150 billion reasons why they were bad people. Our overseas debt went from 50 billion to 165 billion in 6 years, and we've got nothing to show for it. That's why I'm very angry about this last Labor government, and I'm glad the people of New Zealand, the boiled frogs, woke up to the fact before it was too late that their time had to be over for the sake of the future of the country. So when I came out of Wellington after sitting in the Parliament for the first time in 10 years, on the floor of the Parliament, listening intently to the maiden speeches from the ACT Party and from the National Party, I came away optimistic. All in lowercase, please, if you don't mind, Whale.
Yeah, but you must have been quite pleased because when you were the ACT Party leader, you were the one who brought in charter schools, and those are back on the table now.
Well, they shouldn't just be back on the table. We should be opening the first charter school again the day after Easter in 5 days' time. Because in Whangarei, where we had a charter school, where it was mostly young Maori boys who had failed, they had a 98% success rate in NCEA Level 1. And down the road at Whangarei Boys High School, with the same young Maori boys, they had a 40% success rate. So charter schools work. These charter schools we had were working. It was an act of sacrilege that the Labour Party got rid of them, and I can't wait to see them reopen.
You've got a personal thing about charter schools too, though, don't you? Because one of your boys went to a charter school.
Yes, my boy Alex wasn't doing so well at a very prestigious school, costing me $60,000 a year. So not that it was a money-saving exercise, but that was one of the upsides of taking him out of this prestigious school, which is one of the worst schools in New Zealand, by the way, and putting him into a charter school on the North Shore, the Military Academy. It turned him around. He popped class and he went into the army, and the rest is history. It turned him around. It's not for everyone, Whale, but there are so many kids failing the system that don't need to fail.
And I guess that's why the government we've got now is one that appears to celebrate success rather than have a pity party on failure.
Well, I'm pleased about that. I need to tell you, I quite like Lux.
Yeah,
I think Lux is doing okay. He's doing okay. It's a struggle for him every day, but he's doing okay. Mr. Luxon is giving it his best shot, and he's a good man from a good family with good values, good principles, concepts, philosophies. And he will do quite well if he lets himself be Lux, be himself. Don't try and be Cam Wallace, the failed chairman of Air New Zealand, the useless fellow that ran MediaWorks. Don't try and be Sir John Key, who was the ultimate street politician, airport politician, very, very at retail politics. Don't try and mimic these people. Lux needs to just be Lux, and he will do very well.
That's one thing I've noticed with him is he appears rehearsed and contrived, and it's not the natural person that he is. And I always say this to politicians, when they ask me for advice, I said, just be yourself. Don't try and be someone else. And that's exactly what you're saying as well. Don't try and out John Key. You can't do it. Don't try and be all things to all people. Everyone becomes disappointed. Find your own self and portray that and portray your values, and then there will not be a disconnect between what people are seeing and what they're hearing.
Come across as a good man who cares. He can easily come across as a good man by standing beside his wife, because she is a tower of strength to him, and she is, a tribute to wives, to mothers, and to women. And, he just needs to reflect in her quiet glory, get on with life, be humble, stay true to your principles, true to your philosophy, true to any concept you have about governance and the future of New Zealand. Tell it as it is and just get on with the job.
And speaking of getting on with the job, I see that the media have, in conjunction with their pals in the Labour Party and the Green Party, have started a campaign to try and get rid of Nicola Willis before she's even delivered a budget promising tax cuts. You've got, that snivelling little communist Simon Wilson at the Herald going on about we need to have, more taxes. All of these left-wing media people and the Labor Party think that the answer is more taxes, and they really don't want tax cuts. And so they're trying to, Bryce Edwards even put out a thing yesterday saying that Nicola Willis should resign because she hasn't delivered tax cuts. Well, she hasn't even had the budget yet. So, their government's got it up against them, haven't they, with the media and these snivelling little lefties?
Let's get some perspective about this. Who gives a shit what Simon Wilson has got to say? Who cares less what Brian Wilkinson, or whatever his name is, Bryce Jones?
Bryce Edwards. Bryce Edwards.
Bryce Edwards. Who gives that mind time? Sensible people like us and your listeners don't give it mind time. We don't read the crap narrated in the New Zealand Herald every day. One, we can't afford to buy the Herald. I certainly can't. And secondly, why would I? Why would I convolute my mind and my way of life and my healthy well-being by reading shit like that every morning?
Oh, exactly. I'm always staggered that there seems to be a very, very large number of budgerigar fanciers that buy the Herald to line the cage of their budgies. I mean, I can't see any other reason why you'd want to. I mean, it's not very absorbent. It's okay for budgies. You wouldn't want to put it in a kitty litter tray to line the bottom of that. It would just, go right through. So I'm staggered that there's so many budgie fanciers out there that want to buy the Herald.
Well, just a minute, Wale. I'm an animal rights activist and have been all of my life. And this is insulting and demeaning to animals. So let's move on. Now, coming back to the Green story, I sat in the Parliament next to Jerry, and I was sitting in the seat where former MPs could sit, and I was watching from the left-hand side of the Parliament, across the Parliament, to the maiden speeches of the ACT members and national members. I looked down the rows of the Labor Party benches and the Green Party benches, and I've never seen so many losers and so many drop kicks assembled in one place at one time. It was awful. So, Wale, I don't give mind time to what thieves, formerly members of the Labor Party, have to say as they rob stores around town, or grandstanding MPs that represent me in Parliament, local MPs that are irrelevant. So I don't deal in the politics of irrelevancy. But I want to come back to something that's on the horizon, hasn't yet been eliminated, like Hamas, the terrorist group in Gaza. They need to be eliminated. The Green Party, in terms of what they stand for and what they stand against in the algorithm of the future of this country, are irrelevant, and we mustn't give them mind time. So I was very happy to see MediaWorks go broke. Very happy.
I think most of the country did. When that news broke, I think it was about 11 o'clock on a Wednesday. I was on a ferry to Waiheke, catching some public transport for once in my life. And everybody was looking at their phones, and there was this buzz of excitement, at the premise that News Hub was going to cease to be indoctrinating us on our TV screens. And everyone was thinking, well, why are they waiting till June? Can't they just go now?
Well, the day they hired that Cam Wallace, formerly a steward for Air New Zealand, as boss of MediaWorks, was the day that the final nails will be put into the coffin of that media company. Now, it's not to say that some of the people there were good people. Some, in the minority, some were good people. Most were woke, weak, pathetic puppets of the bosses. That's what they were. And they were singing from the song Left Marxist song sheet, in tune, together, on message, in volume, every day. So I'm glad that they have been gone, they have been eliminated, and they're out of the algorithm. And so I don't mind a responsible fourth estate, but I can't stand these pious, platitudinal gooses that parade themselves as unbiased and peddle their Marxist crap every day of the week and funded by me, hard-working taxpayers, funded by your listeners, hard-working taxpayers going about their business today. The fourth estate, substantially in New Zealand, has been funded by the taxpayers, and the taxpayers have had a bad deal.
And we've had enough. And that's the thing, isn't it? Like when we saw during the pandemic, we didn't get any critical questioning of government decisions. We got a rah-rah team applauding everything Ardern did as she trampled on our rights and our privileges as Kiwis, locking citizens out of the country, locking healthy people up in their houses, and then we saw, of course, the dreadful way that they crushed the protest in Wellington, and the media were all there cheering on the government as they did that. I mean, if it was a centre-right government, they would have been marching in the streets with the people opposing the government, but no, because it was Ardern, they were cheering her on.
Well, I don't want to spend too much time talking about her. It really lowers my self-esteem. And I could get to fail after this interview with you that I can't actually drive my car. I just feel so depressed in the country. And so I'm not going to do that. I don't want to go into about her. I sat next to her in Parliament for 3 years, about 6 feet away from her. I never saw her speak once. I never saw her ask a question once. I didn't see her in Parliament more than a couple of times or once. And then she became Prime Minister of the world. She's now got a knighthood. She's Lady Ardern, and she's vanished into the ether, which is good. So we've moved on. We have a National Act New Zealand First coalition government. I want that's Luxon, the Prime Minister, to do well. I want David Seymour to do extraordinarily well, and I want Winston Peters to excel, because I care about this country, and this country needs turning around, which brings me to a substantive statement, Whale.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of the policies you may or may not have, that you may or may not want to introduce, or you may or may not be thinking about for the forthcoming budget. It's about slowing down, stopping and turning around the civil service that's going to be the challenge. The civil service is still operating with immunity. It's still on fast track in the direction of oblivion. There seems to be no change in thinking at the top of the civil service. That's why the top of the civil service needs rooting out, including the police commissioner and the big bosses of the government department, all overpaid and mostly Labor supporters.
See, I think that when you take over, running the government, you have a change of government, that we should do something similar to what happens in the United States, where all of the heads of departments or people who are responsible, like the Secretary of the Treasury or whatever, are appointed by the incoming government, and the old ones are gassed and given the Don't Come Monday card. And I would have thought, that what the government should have done is said, look, guys, you might have got used to spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, on diversity, equity and inclusion type policies. Well, we're going to cancel all of that. If you don't like that, well, you can get cancelled as well. But just to give you an example of what's going to happen if you don't play ball with what the new direction of the government is, you're all fired. See you later. And then that would just sharpen the focus of their concentration on doing the job they're supposed to be doing, instead of all this womble stuff and woke stuff that they're doing, that's spending millions of dollars on changing signs and renaming things and all sorts of stuff like that. It's just ridiculous that they think they can sit there and wait out this government so they can get their chosen government back in again. The best thing to do is exactly what you said: root them out, get rid of the ne'er-do-wells, and downsize the civil service back to what it was before Labor got in.
Well, let me give you two, for instance, Whale, for your listeners. Hundreds of thousands of people that are hanging off of every word this morning. I'll give you two, for instances. Goff, Phil Goff, who went to Parliament the same day as me in 1981.
Yeah.
The worst mayor of Auckland we've ever had, including Bruce Hubbard.
Even worse than Len Brown.
The worst. Len Brown technically, as mayor, got things done. So I've got no criticism of there. What he did in the Ngāti Whātua room and how he left the curtains is not my business.
Yeah.
But technically, he was quite good. Phil Goff, Auckland debt, Auckland City, wider Auckland Council debt from 4.9 billion to 9.9 billion. It's 5 billion. In 6 years he was in office. He was promoted to the High Commissioner in London, and he's still sitting in Belgravia, hobnobbing it with royalty and everyone else, funded by and paid for by this National Party coalition government. Why hasn't he been given a back of the aeroplane ticket home to New Zealand where he can go and milk his goats on his goat farm at South Auckland and Manurewa? Why doesn't they do that? The next one.
Trevor Mallard should do the same.
Oh, absolutely. Mallard was the worst speaker in New Zealand's history, and that takes a lot of doing.
It takes a lot of beating. You have to beat Jerry Wall, and he was pretty bad, and you were there when Jerry Wall was the speaker.
Well, I was. Jerry Wall was at least a decent human person.
Yeah.
Wall was a good man, notwithstanding his foibles and his speakership. But anyway, he's still over there hobnobbing it with the new Prime Minister of Ireland and living the life of O'Reilly. And he should be put on a plane and brought back. Why are we leaving these people over there in these hobnob positions when they don't think like us, they don't work like us, they don't have beliefs like us, and they're against us?
Well, Winston's the foreign minister, and I imagine he's working very quickly to find replacements and to give them that exact message, because I know for a fact that Winston Peters does not like politicians becoming high commissioners or ambassadors. He believes that is a job for professional diplomats and not for, journeyman politicians who are getting a reward for ending their, less than average political parliamentary career.
Napoleon said, didn't he, words don't even move the leaves in the trees. Pass me my sword. So Winston this morning should send a missive to Goff and to Mallard. You're on the London Heathrow flight, Air New Zealand, flight number 1, out to Los Angeles tonight, and you'll be back in New Zealand for Easter.
Yeah, I agree. Totally, especially with Mallard.
So you see, Whale, these are the kind of resolute decisions that I want to see made. I am totally supportive of Lux, of Seymour, and of Winston. I want them to excel for the future of this country, not for me. My future's well past. But for my kids, your kids, and their kids, I want them to do really well. But we've actually got to get some runs on the board. We've got to make progress. There's nothing that will increase Lux's profile publicly and support out there amongst the chattering classes than to get runs on the board. Say to government departments, no more of this Maorification. Get on with representing us as equal New Zealanders, all together and one going forward as one. That's what they should do. And they should repeat these messages in volume over time. You cannot repeat serious messages enough. And you hear me doing it. You repeat important messages and statements loud, in volume, over time, continually. And so we've got to get that message out, because I see New Zealand at the moment still in a state of flux.
Yeah.
There's a lot of balls in the air. These balls, as they come down for the government, need to be well managed, and we need to be well focused. But I repeat what I said, in case your listeners have just tuned in as they get back from Countdown supermarkets into their cars and turn on their wireless. I repeat what I said. We've got to slow down, stop, and turn around the civil service before we'll see real progress.
Yeah, the civil service is actually a drag on the economy. And the economy is what is going to make New Zealand prosperous, was going to make people's lives better. It's what lifts people out of poverty. Welfare never lifts people out of poverty. It keeps them in poverty. And so, we need to have a government that's actually focused on the economy. And I noticed that Grant Robertson, in his valedictory speech, mentioned that if he had his time over again, he would have borrowed more. I mean, is this guy a moron, or does he think that money grows on trees?
Let me stop you there. Grant Robertson told us 6 years ago that we were going to have government spending within 30% of GDP. If we had have kept government spending within 30% of GDP for the last 6 years, instead of having an internal debt of 9 billion, we would today have a surplus of 5 billion.
Yeah.
So let's get that up on the record. Well, that is where we come. But I want to come back to some other geopolitical things that are really worrying me, if I can seek leave to do that.
Sure.
Well.
Yeah, go for it.
That is the Middle East and Ukraine. Let's start with Ukraine. I'm seriously worried about Ukraine. I'm a student of that war, that senseless, needless, hopeless, fruitless, worthless war.
Yep.
And I stand it. As you know, the battle lines are 1,500 kilometres long. That's the front line. 1,500 kilometres from North Cape to the Bluff.
Yep.
That's the battle lines. The Ukrainians now, all the tanks are just about gone, and they're sitting in trenches with Kalashnikov cloth guns and hand grenades, which are shared around, and you only get a certain number each day. I am seriously worried about the future of Europe vis-a-vis the Russian-Ukraine war as of today going into Easter, the day after the special day in the life of Jesus. I'm seriously worried. I'm seriously worried about that. I cannot see a victory for Ukraine, which defaults to. I cannot see a victory for Europe, which defaults to. I cannot see a victory for the United States, which defaults to. I cannot see a victory for New Zealand in this Russian-Ukraine war. I'm very worried about it. So I want to park that for a sec. That's going to affect us economically, and this country is absolutely flat broke. I want to now come to the Middle East and October the 7th last year, when a massacre took place of unprecedented. I haven't got words to describe it, but how I can describe it is I can talk to you about the retaliation that's needed today. I'm a supporter of Netanyahu. Yeah. I'm a supporter of Israel. I'm a supporter of their sovereignty. And I'm a supporter of them carving out their right to live in peace for the rest of time. And if they don't take on the Hamas criminals in the tunnels under Rafah today, tomorrow, or at the latest after Easter next week, then it's going to be all over, because the pressure of the world will bear upon them. They'll have to retreat, and these criminals will take over Israel at a time yet to be judged. It's going to happen. These people have got to be eliminated. This Hamas crowd have got to be eliminated. And I've got a message for the Palestinian supporters. I don't have anything against a good human person wherever they come from. Yeah. But these people that are sympathisers, these people that live and work and presumably pay taxes in Aotearoa, New Zealand, if they don't like our policies, our foreign policy, and our support of Israel, they should off back to where they came from.
Yeah, that's fairly blunt, but I tend to agree with you on that, Banksy, because that's the thing, right? They've got a right to freedom of speech by living in New Zealand. They can march down the street and chant whatever they like, but they can't accuse Israel of genocide when they're chanting genocidal chants themselves. And let's be perfectly honest here. The chant from the river to the sea means the death of every Jew between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Exactly. That's what it means.
Exactly.
If you look at the history of all the countries around Israel, right, if you look at Lebanon, how many Jews live in Lebanon? None. How many Jews live in Syria? None. How many Jews live in Jordan? None. How many Jews live in Egypt? About 100. How many Jews live in Saudi Arabia? About 100. Right? So if from the river to the sea, they want to cleanse Israel of Jews, that is genocidal and that is a chant. And it is what Hamas believes in.
We need to nail this file this morning. That kind of rhetoric, that narrative, that language has no place in this modern society of New Zealand, and it should be stamped out, and we don't hear it being stamped out. The elimination of the Jews, that's what the chant is, and it's wrong. It is so wrong, and we should say it's wrong. And if these people don't like New Zealand because of our foreign policy, fold your tents, pack your bags, get them angry, get on a plane, and I'm sure we can get the government to help fund your airfare back to where you came from.
That's the thing that I'm staggered about with people who come from, countries that aren't democratic, where there is no right to the freedom of speech. There is basically no human rights, especially for women, especially for gay people, especially for anybody who doesn't fit the monotheistic rules of Islam. There's none of that, but they come here and then they want to change New Zealand to be like where they came from. And nobody says anything. We go, oh, no, we've got to accept that because we're a multicultural society. And we've got to be polite. And I actually believe that New Zealand needs to have a what I call a FIFO policy when it comes to immigration. That is fit in or F off.
Please don't get me on immigration. That's another subject. 137,000 new arrivals last year, most of them uneducated, most of them unwanted, all doing jobs that New Zealanders could be able to easily do, and costing the country a fortune. So don't get me onto that. But I'll tell you what I want to put up the mast that people don't know. Wars are about money. If Russia had as poor amount of money as Ukraine, Russia wouldn't be fighting today. Ukraine wouldn't be at war if Ukraine had no money. Hamas wouldn't be fighting Israel if Hamas had no money. So let me tell you where the money is. Iran, $225 billion US dollars in cash.
Which Biden gave them. Which Biden gave them.
Well, we know that. Iraq, another sympathizer for these people, $265 billion US dollars in cash. Hamas are cashed up. Israel aren't. Hamas are.
Yep.
Ukraine isn't. Russia is. It's about money, whale. And if the money runs out, then the war stops and defeat is absolutely around the corner. So we have to be careful. So we've got fighting in the Middle East, which is affecting trade and the well-being and stability of the globe. We've got fighting in Ukraine on the doorstep in Europe, which I can't see a winner. And we don't have the kind of leadership we need. I say, we should really ramp up the arming of the Ukrainians and get stuck in and fight like we mean to fight and fight like we mean to win. We should really ramp up Israel and get them ready to go, and they should go into Rafah at least at the latest after Easter, and they need to take out these criminals. Because if not now, when? If not now, when, Whale, are we going to stop the criminals in Hamas, in the trenches in the southern Gaza, from doing what they're doing? They will come back and rape, torture, kill and murder young kids and elderly people in the future sometime soon.
Yeah, I mean, Blinken is saying to Netanyahu, and so is, Biden, don't go into Rafah or else. Netanyahu's saying, sorry, you don't get to dictate how we fight a war. If we need to go into Rafah, we'll go into Rafah. Now, I've got a lot of contacts in Israel, and October the 7th was a sea change. It was a step change away from the way Israel's previously dealt with things. In 2014, I was in Israel and I was getting rocketed and everything out of Gaza when I visited Sderot and some of those, kibbutzes like Be'eri and those places that were invaded by Hamas on October the 7th. I've been there to those places. I've seen, I was sitting there watching the videos that were coming out, and I sat through a 45-minute, presentation of the videos that were taken off the Hamas terrorists, and it was appalling. It was galling. I was speechless for hours after watching the most appalling crimes against humanity. And, I sit there and I think, and I've been talking to these people in Israel, and they're saying, no, we're not going to think that we're just going to, put a fence around and stop them coming in. We need to actually sort this out so it never happens again. And that's why the catch cry is never again is right now. And there is a change in the Israeli mindset. They are not going to tolerate this anymore. And they're going to remove Hamas as the government of Gaza. They're going to assist in the rebuild of Gaza, and they're going to ensure that there is a government put in place in that area that is not indoctrinating the citizens, is not hijacking United Nations organizations like UNRWA. And they've systematically got all of the information, all the data on UNRWA and all of the things that they've been doing in the schools and the health system and everything. And they're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. And they don't care what the United States thinks, and they don't care what the UK thinks. They care about their people.
Well, let's move it from that side of the world to this side of the world. Two questions, Wale.
Yeah.
Why is it that there are no other countries around Gaza that want to take these nice people? Why?
The Egyptians have got, this is the thing that we saw Douglas Murray last week in an interview with the BBC, and the BBC interview was saying, Israel has a fence around Gaza and they're not letting aid in. And he said to him, well, there's another country that has a fence around Gaza as well. It's Egypt. How come you don't mention them? And Egypt's fence is actually more intimidating than what the Israelis had. But nobody ever mentions Egypt. They've got several tank battalions and troop battalions on the border of Gaza in Egypt, making sure no Palestinians come into Egypt. But nobody says anything about that.
Well, I wonder in this valuable time that we've got left today, we could turn our attention to the war at home.
Yeah.
The war at home.
We do have a war at home.
We have a war at home. And I want to start with the war on our traditional faith, our beliefs, our spirituality, our values, and the morality of New Zealand Incorporated, which is under stress, at war within itself, and losing. We now live, Wale, in case you don't know, in a post-Christian, heathenistic society where anything goes, where there are no values, there are no principles, there's no right, there's no wrong, there is them, and there is us, and we are losing, and we are divided, and we are broke, and we're losing our sovereignty.
Yeah.
That's the war we need to fight at home, Wale. Do you understand?
No, I totally understand. I mean, you and I grew up, you're a little bit older than me, obviously, but we grew up in a society where we had a true egalitarian New Zealand society where Jack was as good as his master. And, we had equality of opportunity in New Zealand, and people could work hard and get ahead. They could buy a house. They could do all these things. Well, systematically over the last 30 or 40 years, and I think it goes on, maybe a bit longer than that, systematically those values have been eroded. We've got the bizarre situation where we have government organisations that are, taking political positions on things that shouldn't matter to them. Like, for example, whether or not Arthur can decide to call himself Martha, and we should go along with the delusion that Arthur is Martha. Back in your day, back in my day, we'd say, "Oh, don't be stupid, Arthur." But now we're told that men can compete in women's competitions in sport, and that's okay. Well, it's not okay. There's a reason for having men and women's sports, and just because some bloke wears a frock and decides to call himself a girl's name doesn't make him a woman.
You see, the moral fabric of the country has disintegrated. We have no direction driven by values and principles, doing the right thing and doing things right. We don't even teach it in the schools, Whale. No. We can't go back. I mean, I would think that 70% of New Zealanders would not understand the real significance day by day of Easter. They wouldn't know what yesterday was on the Christian calendar, and they wouldn't care because we've now changed the kaleidoscope of New Zealand's egalitarian society where there's them and us, them hate us, and us hate them, and it's divided, and on race lines in particular, but on faith lines more particular, where you and I, living in this post-Christian society, are in the minority, and you do as you're told and shut up.
Yeah, but it's by design. This is what I used to call creeping socialism, right? This is by design. It is a tactic that has been used over and over and over again of dividing society into silos, pitting one silo against the next silo. It's convenient because it keeps the masses disheartened and dispirited, and then they can't unite for a common goal. And we see the polarization, particularly in politics, where everything the Labour Party says is good and everything the National Party says is bad, or vice versa. The National Party is just as bad as the Labour Party when it comes to things like that. But the left have a resolve. They have a drive to control society that the right doesn't have, or even the centre doesn't have, especially in the centre, where there's a prevailing attitude of that we should go along to get along. And that is ankle tapping our society. It's ankle tapping our future, and it's giving in to the under the guise of diversity to a monoculture where everyone has to agree with what the state says. And this is why we see a prevalence of the state stepping into our society. We saw that during the pandemic. We saw the government telling healthy people to stay at home. We were told that you couldn't go to a restaurant unless you had a pass. We were told that the unvaccinated were horrible people and they should be discriminated against. And then when you layer on the racism and of Maori versus the rest, layer that on top of it, you've got divisions in society where people are fighting each other, and all the politicians and those in control and the elites are rubbing their hands with glee saying, yes, it's worked.
Well, let me leave you with this, Whale, as I go out and earn some money and pay some tax so that other people can live in a style that I'd like to become accustomed. Let me leave you with this thought. People often say to me, oh, John, where did you get your energy from, and why did you do this, and how did you do that, and whatever success you may have had, how do you attribute that, and what happened to you? I just want to say and leave you with one thing, Whale, to think about. Firstly, thank God for the Salvation Army. If it wasn't for the Salvation Army that would pick me up on a Sunday morning and drive me 16 miles to Sunday school, provide us with jelly after Sunday school, and then drive us 16 miles back to where we lived, and taught us the difference between right and wrong and good and bad and evil and righteousness and doing the right thing and doing things right, I wouldn't be where I am today. So thank God for Sunday school. You're not going to hear this from any of your other interviewees in a short time. What? Thank God for Sunday school. I'll say it again. Thank God for Sunday school in a Christian church with a faith that belonged to the Salvation Army that took me there every Sunday as a kid. That's what I say. And I know it's hackneyed, and I know it's old-fashioned, and I know that there could be a charge of treason or something else that could be laid against me in this post-Christian time, in this hedonistic country we live in. But, we've got to get back to some very simple faith-based principles of how we should live and where we want to take the future.
I agree with you. I've been through some challenges in the past, couple of years or few years, with a stroke and all sorts of other things. And every morning I wake up and I thank God that He's in my life. Makes a huge difference to how I can cope with the challenges ahead and how I've coped with the challenges in the past. And I'm never going to resile from that. I'm never going to resile from my faith about what I believe. And I'll use every opportunity I can to tell people what the good news is. And Easter is a perfect time for that. And this show is tomorrow morning people are going to be waking up on Good Friday, and as you say, most New Zealanders won't even know what Good Friday is, but I do, and you do, and that's what's important. And we tell people what that means, and we tell people what Easter Sunday means. So. I still have hope for New Zealand. I have a whole lot of, energy to see New Zealand become a better place. I'm totally opposed to polarization and division and all of those things. I learned the evils of that the hard way, and people like you and people like me can make a difference as long as we keep talking. As soon as we go quiet, they win.
Well, Wale, I leave you on this note. I salute you. You are the son of a king, and you are living in the kingdom, and you're grateful, you're blessed. And I just think about some of the great things that have happened to me in my life, and I'm very, very grateful. And one of them is knowing you and your family, and we're thinking of your father at this difficult time for him and his life. But we're not fearful of the future. Talk soon, Wale.
All right. Thank you very much, Banksy. Appreciated you coming on The Crunch again. Banksy is a great mate, and he's like watching Speedway. There's going to be crashes, but you don't know when. And with him, that he's going to say something, but you don't know what he's going to say. And I love having him on the show. Love him or loathe him, you're never going to die wondering what Banksy thinks. Tell me your thoughts about what Banksy had to say by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Simon O'Connor lost his seat at the election, so hopefully he'll be free to speak his mind. As I said before, I'm planning on challenging him about the way MPs refused to speak to the protesters at Wellington, amongst other things. And we're going to talk about free speech and a few other topics. Simon's on the line now, so let's get chatting. Welcome to The Crunch.
Cam, it's lovely to join you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, look, I've been reading a few of your posts on your Substack On Point, and I've been sitting there nodding sagely thinking, have we lost something from our Parliament by Simon not being in Parliament anymore? And I have to say, I think we have lost something from Parliament for you not being there, because your writing is really, really good, and it's on point. Just to take your headline. Do you feel a lot freer now that you're no longer in Parliament? Do you feel like a weight has come off your shoulders?
Look, I do. You miss elements of Parliament, to start on that side. I certainly miss engaging with my colleagues, particularly my year group. I miss helping constituents. But on the other side, life is so much freer when you don't have to be worried every day about what the next role, job, scandal is. But also, paradoxically, you are freer to speak and think in a way outside of Parliament, which in many ways, Cam, is quite sad. Parliament's meant to be the place where people are the most free, protected, if you will, to speak. And yet, ironically, not. And we can get into that a bit more if you like as well. So no, I'm enjoying writing again. I've been taking a bit of a break somewhat, but it's nice to be writing and thinking about things again.
Well, look, maybe you'll, I see you've got a couple of podcasts up. Maybe you want to start talking to Reality Check Radio and become a host.
Look, you never know. I've never been shy of an opinion. It wouldn't matter if you're talking to my parents, my wife, my friends, or my now former political colleagues. Yeah, it was never shy of an opinion on things.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I think that politics, particularly over the last, let's say, 10 years, maybe let's go back to the Clark years. I think that politics became highly polarised in New Zealand, particularly with Helen Clark, and then when we changed to the John Key government, and then back again, of course, to the Ardern regime. I believe New Zealand politics is poorer for that period of time where there was increased polarisation, where there wasn't a contest of ideas, which, of course, is fostered by free speech. If you had the wrong think, you were shouted down. We even saw, ostensibly someone who claims to be a journalist trying to silence voices on the other side, with the dirty politics scandal. And let's make no bones about it. That's what it was about. It was about being polarised and about silencing voices that were effective against the government, that, the opposition parties as they were back then.
Yeah, look, sadly, I think we are seeing a more polarised New Zealand. That's been evident certainly in recent years, but I think you're right to say it's been going for quite a while. And the thing about polarising, it's a bit like a metronome or a pendulum, if you will, that
yes.
It swings one way, then it swings a bit harder the other, and it gets worse and worse. Look, I would argue and have suggested, even when I've given lectures at universities over the years, MMP actually has a lot to do with this. I think you can look back to the mid-90s, where all of a sudden, instead of having, if you will, 100, 120 MPs, if you will, with their own power base of an electorate, it was replaced by MMP, which puts the party first. And then who's first in the party? It's the leader of the day. And what they want, she or he, becomes very dominant. And so everyone sort of has to kick in behind that narrative. So you don't, I think, see as much discussion and debate in the public realm. And I'm sad to say I don't think you see as much, well, I can speak to it because I was there. You don't have as much discussion and debate even within the Parliament or caucuses itself. Again, imagine, and I'm sorry, I'm probably not going to articulate this as well as I should, but the pyramid of influence has become very steep. So instead of being very broad, lots of MPs and theorists discussing things, it's become very, very narrow, that triangle, and it's led by the top. What the party leader wants is generally where the party is going.
Yeah, I mean, it's an inside joke in Parliament or in the Beltway of Wellington that there's a cabinet, but there's actually a kitchen cabinet, which is 3 or 4, maybe 5 people at the most that are the real power brokers, and they're literally creatures of the leader or the party. And we've seen this both with Helen Clark, with the John Key and English government, and we saw, of course, that with the Ardern-Hipkins government. And I'm not sure we're seeing it just quite yet with the government of Luxon, because there's 3 parties in there that have got some very mercurial and strong-willed people that won't take well to direction that we all need to, party vote national or wear a blue suit or all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think, again, it's, for me, not particularly partisan insofar as it's manifested itself as this centralising of influence or power in the MMP environment is not unique to the left or the right. I think you're correct that the current coalition deal, sort of this 3-headed dynamic, will create tensions. But, for the sake of argument, Cam, that's still going to be 3 leaders who have strong controls of their party.
Yeah.
But I probably would just want to stress to listeners, it's not that New Zealand is only run by 1, 2 or 3 people, but that the influence of individual MPs, ministers, even ministries, heads of ministries, is, I think, being constrained within the MMP environment. I know I keep coming back to it, but whoever the leaders are at the time hold enormous sway. And unity is such a key element. Media will exploit any disunity in a political party. And so it's a very brave, perhaps stupid member of parliament who steps away from that. So unity keeps a lot of people quiet, if you will. But I should also add, there still can be robust discussions in caucus and so forth. But again, it is a narrow group of people, the senior people, who often set the direction of things.
Yeah. I've seen it happen inside the National Party. Obviously with my family connections and things like that, I see these things up close and personal. And I've never been comfortable with this cult of personality that started really with Helen Clark. When they contrived to always state that Helen Clark was the first elected Prime Minister, because, of course, Jenny Shipley was the first woman Prime Minister. Helen Clark was bent out of shape with that, and when she eventually ended up Prime Minister, went about making sure that there was even plaques being erected. This is opened by Helen Clark, the first woman elected Prime Minister, which, of course, is a fantasy. We don't elect our Prime Ministers. They're chosen by the caucus to be the leader. But that was the start of that cult of personality where, you saw Helen Clark on every billboard, even though it was heavily photoshopped or whatever. We saw with John Key, with National Party sycophants running around with blue T-shirts on saying, I'm a key person. We saw that with Jacinda Ardern, especially, not so much with Christopher Hipkins. And we're seeing it again with Christopher Luxon, but at a different sort of a level, because Luxon isn't a John Key. John Banks I was talking to earlier, and he said the same thing. Christopher Luxon needs to be Christopher Luxon, not try and be John Key. But this cult of personality kind of adds to that polarization where the leader says what goes. And if someone like you who has very strong moral views, particularly on things like abortion, you get slapped around and told, I've had a word with Mr. O'Connor and, he's modified his stance or whatever. Now, I know you pretty well from afar, but I know your upbringing, and I know you haven't modified your stance at all on some of those moral issues.
No, that's true. I mean, look, I've been very outspoken on life issues to do with China, amongst other things. And, I hold my views carefully and well considered. I would add, always interested actually in a debate and a discussion with people. Everything can change. But, I remember during particularly the Roe versus Wade situation, a journalist sort of questioned me about it. And I sort of stressed to them, I said, look, I didn't wake up this morning having never thought about these things. Quite a deep, in my own perception, Cam, quite a deep thinker. Again, it doesn't mean I'm right, but I don't tend to come to an opinion. But
you're willing to listen
lightly.
As well. You're willing to listen and have a debate,
Oh, I love it. And look, it's one of the sad. Look, I didn't go into Parliament naively by any means. Had been around the party and so forth. But
especially in Tamaki electorate, I mean, they're the most political of animals,
Oh, I never went to bed wondering what my electorate thought on issues, and that was great. It sometimes drove me and my wife a little mad insofar as you'd be trying to go out for a walk and people would be stopping us left, right and centre to chat. And at one level, it's great. Occasionally, it would have been nice just to have spent 10 minutes with Rachel. But it's, I don't know, I'd sort of hoped that Parliament would have had more time to think and consider things. And please don't get the idea that we're sitting on leather couches, smoking pipes, drinking whiskey,
pondering the world's imponderables. They got rid of the smoke-filled rooms. I think that's a tragedy and needs to be brought back, personally, being a cigar smoker myself.
Well, I've always joked better to smoke in this world than the next, but that's not an encouragement to start smoking. But no, I suppose what I'm trying to get at is we didn't have as much time in Parliament as I'd hoped to sit back and consider things. As I say, you don't want to have the big reading rooms where you spend hours pondering, but at the same time, so much is a rush, so little is done on the fly. And you'll know it yourself, having been a deep follower of politics. So much policy happens in reaction to something else at the time. It's just pushed and rushed through. So I have been disappointed that we don't discuss things more. I am concerned, be it through media or leadership, that ideas are often quickly crushed because they don't suit the narrative. Oh, you're the wrong person. It's the view not to be aired. So the ideas aren't teased out. And so the final point I'd make is it's no surprise we're constantly, or the Parliament's constantly having to make amendments and changes because they're making mistakes and they're not anticipating the problems down the line because, again, it hasn't been well thought out.
Yeah. I mean, take your tweet about Roe versus Wade. It was fairly innocuous, really. The argument was had by the media largely because for New Zealanders, it's an academic argument. We have probably pretty liberal abortion laws in New Zealand. They're in no danger of being replaced anytime soon or even remotely changed. And what happens in the United States, where there's a highly technical argument over whether the federal government has autonomy over the states. And let's face it, that was what the argument of Roe versus Wade was about. It wasn't about that argument in the Supreme Court wasn't about abortion. It was about whether the federal government has the right to tell states how they can operate their own country, which people seem to forget that the United States is a collection of countries. That's why it's called the United States. But that argument was missed in the gay abandon, for want of a better term, of the media wanting to get a Conservative MP for daring to have an opinion that was different to their liberal worldview.
Yeah, well, that seemed to be the driving part. It was that you were not allowed to have any opinion other than one, which was to be completely, in this case, pro-abortion and to support New Zealand's rather extreme abortion laws. So your first point's correct. This was an American situation. Your second point's incredibly important for listeners to understand. The whole thing of Roe versus Wade, regardless of one's view on abortion itself, was really about states' rights. And at the end of the day, it's the United States of America, and each state wants to run its own health system, education system in its own way, not being directed by federal government. And that's been one of the key drivers. But look, the way that was being handled, certainly, was that 2 or 3 years ago?
A couple of 3 years. Yeah, probably 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, all that media in particular and others were trying to do is say there is to be no discussion. There is to be no debate on these topics. And New Zealanders should actually be quite concerned, again, regardless of their ethical views. We have a number of topics now. It doesn't matter if it's life issues, gender issues, to do with the Treaty of Waitangi, for example. These are verboten. You're not meant to discuss them. Climate change, around COVID, of course. There's only mass immigration's
another one. You dare not say we're full. Let's put a sign up and tell everyone we're full. You're not allowed to do that. We've got to welcome all comers, even if they're ratbags.
Well, you've got the whole notion of multiculturalism as I study this at university. It's one of the degrees behind me. These are fascinating topics, but they're fraught. But unfortunately, in modern New Zealand, the more fraught the topic, the less you're allowed to talk about, or supposedly to talk about it. And two things might happen, Cam. Either you get attacked for having a counter opinion, and what we just talked around Roe versus Wade's a good example of that. But I can think of other colleagues who spoke up to do with the treaty, climate change, and so forth, who were also forced to apologise. The second, and I think really important, if I might, is effectively people get censored. Yes. You just don't get published. You don't. So you mentioned my Substack. One of the reasons I'm writing there is that it's very infrequent that people like myself get published in mainstream media. We submit articles. They just don't get published. And you'll know of a lot of people in that space. They just don't get heard. So really to stress again to people, there are a lot of good people out there thinking, writing, speaking. It just doesn't often break into mainstream media because the editors won't allow it.
Well, I mean, one of your Substack posts is on exactly what we've just been talking about. This, it's really a government and governmental organisation and large corporates that are pushing this diversity, equity, and inclusion type thing, which is, it's actually an oxymoron because their roles are about creating division and about creating inequity and about excluding people, because while they're being inclusive of, I don't know, Maori or trans people or whatever, then they're not actually looking for the best person for a job. They're looking for someone who fits ticks boxes. And so you might be missing out on the best person for a job because you want them to be diverse and equal and inclusive. And in actual fact, you're being the opposite. But there's this insane amount of money that's being spent on doing all of this stuff. And in New Zealand, it's getting worse. I mean, we're behind the rest of the world in this, but we can look at the UK and the United States and see where it ends up, and it doesn't end up anywhere nice.
No, it doesn't, because actually a lot of this identity politics, progressivism, wokeism, whatever you want to term it, is actually built on division. You've nailed it right at the start. And division doesn't lead to people coming together harmoniously. It leads to more division, which is why you've got this constant fight in the intersectionality area. Who is the greater victim? And it just spirals. And actually, ultimately, without being too heavy, it ends violently. And you saw hints of that last year with the protests at Albert Park, for example, the attempts so far to cancel different events. It actually gets violent, be it in word or physically. So we're on a bad trajectory. But yeah, like that latest Substack, I was frustrated or more frustrated that, how much money has been spent on either divisive entities such as the Christchurch Call, because at its heart it is about dividing people, believe it or not. And then, yes.
We'll come back to the Christchurch Call, because there's an interesting thing that I'll tell you about that you probably don't know, but carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm happy to come back to it. But yeah, all these DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion roles, put it this way, even if you want to take the politics out of it or your viewpoints on it, at the end of the day, would you prefer we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on some Mandarin talking to us about what diversity looks like, or higher paid police officers or nurses or people who are running our trade policy? I know that I prefer the latter. And we know the government's cutting back the civil service. I suppose part of my argument is I bet you a lot of these DEI roles won't go. It'll be the hard workers on the front line that will, and I think that's very sad.
Well, the funny thing is I've heard a bit of a rumour from the inside that actually DEI people in those types of roles are in the firing line of the government.
This is good if that's the case.
But whether or not the civil service listens to the ministers, it's another matter. But it is good. But just touching on that Christchurch Call, now I happen to know that one country applied to join the Christchurch Call, and if you have a look at the list of countries, there's quite a few. United States and Canada and Great Britain and France, obviously, and New Zealand. But one country applied to join the Christchurch Call, and the people of that country, and indeed their diaspora across the world, are among the most victimised people on the planet, and they were quietly told to go away. And that country was Israel. And I know that's true. I know people that were involved in the application and they were gobsmacked, but being Israelis, they just sort of shrugged and went, oh, well, if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. I
can completely confirm it, because it was something I raised. It came across my desk a couple of years ago as an issue, and I remember raising it into the likes of MFAT and DPMC to say, well, was there an application? Why was it turned down? So you're absolutely correct. But I think it is also very much the Israeli approach, not to make too much of a song and dance about it. But I think it just symbolically shows a problem within the very structure of the Christchurch Call. Why would this lively democracy not be allowed to be part of this organisation? And doubly so, as you pointed out, with anti-Semitism as the canary in the coal mine of all and pretty much every act of intolerance. So no, it just shows that the call is broken from the outset.
Yeah, that'd be a saving that we could get immediately. Just axing that is just not needed. And we've seen surveys being conducted by so-called disinformation experts that are saying now that they were surprised at how little disinformation there is actually around. These are the so-called experts, and they were shocked that their survey, their study of disinformation showed that it was a very, very tiny amount of disinformation and misinformation that was being spread that was then changing people's views or whatever. It was almost under 1% or something like that. It was ridiculously small. So I don't think we even need it.
Oh, look, I don't mind civil organisations wanting to discuss these topics. I'm always very nervous when governments get involved, and we always remember the single source of truth statement. And for me, it's slightly symbolic of obviously that situation, but the wider ones. You just don't need government bodies in any shape or form trying to determine what is right think or right speak, and what they deem as disinformation versus not. It's a very, very fraught area. And so, the fact that the Christchurch calls mandate has widened almost from day one, from obviously the tragedy with the mosque shootings, into now a whole array again of progressive causes is something that should be ringing alarm bells in people's minds.
You end up with a situation like the Human Rights Commission, who are decidedly absent on actual human rights. We saw during the pandemic their utter silence at some of the most appalling breaches of our Bill of Rights that occurred. People were being forced and mandated to have medical procedures completely against the Bill of Rights. We had our freedoms trampled on. We had healthy people locked up in their homes. We had citizens of New Zealand unable to even come into the country. And because you were in Parliament at this time, and which manifested itself in a very large protest for a very long period of time, and there hasn't been a protest like that actually in New Zealand, except for maybe perhaps Bastion Point or Motua Gardens, in terms of an occupation of an area for a lengthy amount of time. And
no, I agree.
We saw the end result of that, which was the power of the state trampling over people's right to protest. But at the same time, we also saw the media in lockstep with what the government said, standing up there on the balcony at Parliament, protected by armies of police and cheering on the government. And we also saw the bizarre situation, and I'm interested in your insights on this, where every political party that was in the Parliament at the time agreed that they wouldn't go and actually meet or talk to the protesters. You're a free speech person. Did that really grate with you? I mean, no, I'm not sure anybody's ever asked you that, but I'm going to.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. No, it did great. I think, I can't speak for all MPs by any means, but I think, it was a real conundrum, a real question for a lot of people. Our natural inclination, certainly mine, is to go and talk to people. And certainly in the early days of the protests. So for me personally, the protest dynamic did begin to change, which doesn't invalidate it, but there was a change. But actually, our job is to listen to people. And there was many a time as I was out and about on the street, so this is down in Wellington, that would bump into my constituents going, well, where are you? Well, it's tricky, I'm here right now. But in terms of engaging in the protest. So, I think unfortunately that groupthink that we've been touching on across a number of topics sort of kicked in, and the early decisions, partly, and to be fair, on the leadership at the time, across the parties and the Parliament, there was sort of an uncertainty of what was happening, the advice they were getting. The decision was made, look, let's not engage. And then once they'd made that decision, comes back to what we were talking around unity earlier, it's very hard to change course. And the longer that went on, then it becomes a real high-risk situation for any MP or MPs to go against that. In other words, had an MP gone out, they would have been able to go out. No one's going to crash tackle them. But politically, I think they would have been eviscerated from their parties, leadership, media, and otherwise, and become effectively impotent for the rest of their career. So a lot of MPs, myself included, were making those calculations. But fundamentally, I think so much would have changed had people talked and listened. As in politicians, I mean, that's what we're there to do. You represent not just the good. Exactly right. You're there to to take all sorts of conversations from all sorts of people. And it's my personal view that I think the two things, if I might, Cam. One, where the protests ended would have been different. But secondly, I think we wouldn't have the same level of resentment we have today in New Zealand. And that's not just around the way the Parliament handled the protests, but the way COVID was managed, I think has left deep, well, not think, I know, has left deep scars and hurt and resentment. And a lot of people want to paper over that, particularly those who are lockstep with Jacinda. But as I go about friends, family, acquaintances, and just people I know, there's deep, deep hurt. And it's going to take a while to heal. And one of the things is what happened has to be discussed very openly and frankly. And you don't see any desire for that within certain segments of society, sadly.
No, there is no desire for that. And, I knew various leaders of particular groups. I was speaking to them during that protest. They just wanted to be heard. And if Trevor Mallard and Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins had got together with, Christopher Luxon and David Seymour and erected a tent out there on the front of the forecourt with some chairs around it in front of everybody and actually sat down for an afternoon and talked very early on, that protest would have dissipated. People would have felt that they were listened to. People would have felt they were heard, and you wouldn't have had the lengthy protest that you had. But the intransigence of, first of all, the regime and then all the other political parties led to, as you say, some deep scars and some hurts that, hey, the people we elect don't want to listen to us. Well, if they don't want to listen to us, then we need to get rid of them. And that's where you get the mischief starting to come in, when actually people just they were hurting. They'd lost jobs, careers, things they'd devoted their life, and particularly if there's nurses or police or military, they don't do it for the money. They do it for a desire to help and serve. And they were treated appallingly for making a choice that is actually protected in the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, well, I think, at the higher level, that I've often said, our rights exist for the bad times. And I raised that in Parliament several times as well.
I remember.
Because, human rights, we don't need them when times are good. They're there for the bad times. And, if you looked at New Zealand's scorecard around the management of COVID, we failed, be it freedom of speech, association, the privacy around your healthcare, freedom of religion, and so forth. I mean, I don't think there was any that we would have got a pass on.
We broke them all.
We did, pretty much collect the whole set. So that's exceptionally sad. I think it's also why we've seen, and it's not just the issues of COVID. I'd say over the years, as again, people have been railroaded into a particular way of thinking or acting, I think it's causing that resentment, frustration, and anger in New Zealanders. And it's why you are seeing more, if you will, partisan politics, why you're seeing more frustrations, and why there's in some ways less debate and discussion and more outbursts of frustration. And it's only going to get worse, because the more people try to lock things down, so hate speech laws, limiting inquiries, telling people you can only have this opinion, it's going to be like squeezing a balloon. It's going to manifest or pop out in other spaces, and often not in a very constructive way.
I mean, I agree with you on that. If you tell someone like me, you can't say that, I say, well, who the hell are you to tell me what I can and can't say? And then I say it anyway. And that's exactly why Reality Check Radio was born and exists, because of that frustration that there were no media outlets out there that would allow people to have free and frank discussions without wanting to cut each other's throats. I mean, you and I probably agree on maybe 65, 70% of something. The 30%, they're not life and death situations, that we're going to cease to talk to each other because we disagree with us on, I don't know, could be something as anodyne as cannabis use. You might you might say no, and I might say, well, mellow out, bro.
That's right, chill out. But that's the most fascinating area. I mean, you know it, and your listeners know it. When you sit down with friends, colleagues, whoever, the 60 or 70% of whatever you agree on is interesting to talk about. But actually, it's that 40 or 30% that you don't.
Yeah.
And as adults in a properly functioning democracy, you can actually sit about and chat and debate and learn and sometimes change, or you learn a bit more about why you believe what you do. But we do seem to be, as a society, stomping that out. And again, it doesn't, the topics where you're only allowed to have one view seems to be increasing. And I suppose, again, it's sort of a bit of a theme of where we're going today, that it's not going to end in a good place because people just get frustrated, and frustration always looks for a way to manifest itself. And sometimes constructively, so that there's more media like Reality Check and others is a good thing, actually. I see it as actually a healthy sign to our democracy that people,
that's the thing. And that's what we're trying to do here at RCR is get all types on the radio. Let's talk to them without interrupting them or trying to push our point of view across in a hostile, competitive, dog-eat-dog style 10-minute interview. That's why we talk to people for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or even an hour or so, because A, we can, because we haven't got, broadcasting schedules like other places have, and B, it's far more fascinating to understand what makes people tick, where they've come from. I mean, we kind of share a little bit of a Fijian heritage, which most people don't know about, right? You served as a missionary in Fiji. I was born in Fiji, so it's the things those are the things that don't come out in the normal combative political type discussions, but they're the kinds of things that come out when we sit here and try and understand where each person is coming from.
Look, absolutely. And, I referenced earlier how, Parliament doesn't have as much time to reflect on issues. And actually an element of that too is a lot of times MPs don't get a chance to interact deeply with one another. So there will be elements, and I'm as much within this, or was, there were MPs in that Parliament, or the parliaments I was involved with, I have no idea of their background. I mean, I know that they're Green or Labour, but I'd have no idea about their life story, and nor them about mine. And in a strange way, that's a bit sad, because actually when you get to know people, you understand a little bit more about how they tick, how they think, and ultimately you can have a more fulsome discussion. But the other thing, and I think you touched on it with mainstream media, they do, to be fair, operate under enormous amount of pressures, be it financial or time schedules. But you do see they very quickly pick and choose MPs they like and MPs they don't like. And the same with commentators. They'll always go back to certain commentators, not others. And I think that's unfortunate because, I look across the parliaments I was involved with. There were really good MPs in Labour or Greens, National, wherever, that basically got no airtime at all. And it was really sad, I think, because they have a lot to contribute. And the same in this Parliament. You'll be certain MPs, Chloe Srawbuck will be on the front page of the Herald most weeks, but I tell you, there's piles of people within, say, the National Party and Labour who also deserve to be heard with their views, but they won't, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, I got to see this myself, nearly 6 years ago now, when I had a stroke and I was in hospital, and it was astonishing, the politicians that I've interacted with over the years who were completely silent about it, and those who came and visited me or inquired. Now, I can tell you that there was just one national MP that bothered, right? And so I'll die in a ditch for that MP because they showed compassion when I was hurting. There was also a number of Labour MPs that contacted me, and one in particular sent me a lovely set of text messages just out of the blue. And I thought, you didn't have to do that, but you saw someone hurting and you reached out, and I'll never attack that person either. I'll have a more kindly view on any foibles that they may have or any issues now, I don't think they're ever going to set the world on fire, right, as an MP, but I have a huge amount of respect for them that they defied their party directives not to speak to Cameron Slater and actually reached out to a human being. And that's the thing that I get to see a lot of in my interactions with MPs and politicians and people like yourself, and which is what I try and get out of talking to those people, so I can share that same interaction that I've had with those people, so they can understand why I think like I do about particular politicians.
Which all makes sense. I mean, I was struck when I finished up in Parliament and lost last year. So not as dramatic, of course, of having a medical stroke, but the number of MPs from the other side who actually messaged me took me aback. I mean, it was absolutely lovely. But I was quite taken aback. I mean, I personally, and they'd have to speak themselves. I've tried not to be a jackass to the other side. I've tried not to. I probably failed at different points, but always tried to keep up good relationships. But I was quite touched, actually, the messages that came through. The second point, if I could, is actually, I think being a good MP shouldn't be judged simply on the ranking they get to or the office that they hold, or a tweet. No, I think there are so many good MPs that I've met over time that will never be ministers. But actually they are hardworking, they represent their community, and that's what it's actually about. The Parliament's there to represent. So actually, the quieter MP who doesn't make a huge noise, that, isn't an undersecretary or a minister, isn't any less effective. In fact, often they're very effective and they're doing their job well, and maybe I could add this, often with very little praise. And we all like to be told we're doing a great job, but actually they just carry on doing their job for their constituents or whatever group they represent. And I think that's really to be admired. And it's something we're potentially losing. You talked about I'm going to talk about the celebrity culture that we seem to be putting on to leadership, and that's certainly an issue here. But it's also happening to MPs in general. It's sort of the ones that get, again, the coverage, and then all these others, what do they do? Actually, they're doing their job. Yeah. They're doing it really well.
They're being considered, and then select committees are asking sensible questions because they've done their reading. They're not out glory seeking. My old grandfather used to say when us kids were hearing around his place, he'd sit down and go, "Empty vessels make the most noise." We were little kids. We go, "What, Grandpa? What does that mean? Empty vessels make the most." Think about it. Empty vessels make the most noise. And then when I became a salesman, one of my mentors said to me, he says, "Cam, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. And that's the ratio that you use them in." And that's the same advice I give to politicians when they come to me for advice. What advice can you give me? 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use them in that ratio. And that's the thing that I see with Christopher Luxon. He's very quick to start talking and keep talking. When actually silence or a more considered answer would be a better result. That's trainable. You can train your way out of that, but you've got to have a willingness to actually sit down and listen. And you've alluded to it. I've alluded to it. Politicians seem to have lost the ability to listen and consider. And listening doesn't mean you agree. Listening just means you listen. That's why I like having a wine with Chris Trotter, for example. Right? Because I want to hear what he's got to say. I might not agree with it, but he might influence me and I might influence him. And so that's why we have that discourse and polarization and segmentation and all of those things prevent discourse. And we need to get back to that. Strongly need to get back to that to avoid calamity. Because New Zealand's about 5 years. New Zealand's about 5 years behind the rest of the world, right? All this DEI stuff has happened in the UK and the US, turned into a disaster. The trans rights movement has turned into a disaster, but we're still pushing ahead with it because the rest of the world's done, and the rest of the world's come to a grinding halt and gone, "Whoa, hang on a second here," particularly with women in sport.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, New Zealand sort of falls into this exceptionalism mindset at times. And what I mean by that is we think we're different. Well, we're not. I mean, we're an amazing country. Let's take all of that as read. But actually, a lot of things which happen in the rest of the world do happen here as well. And it would be great if New Zealand at times would look overseas and go, hey, if we continue down the path we're headed, we're going to do exactly what's happened in the UK or Australia or the States or wherever. So we need to, at times, I think, step away from that exceptionalism. I think the second, more discourse. It's why, as you know, a great believer in free speech. I have no problem with people having very different views to mine. In fact, it was a little known fact, but, when we had these, I went through major ethical discussions when I was in Parliament. Didn't go in for them, but they seemed to follow me. So abortion, euthanasia, there was conversion therapy, cannabis use. I mean, they're all there. But I would spend most of my time actually listening to the alternative side. So, in my electorate office, people who wanted to come and tell me that they agreed with me wouldn't get an interview or wouldn't get a slot because I don't need to be told that. Time was made for opponents or people who who had a different view. That was much more use to me. And so we need more of that. But to be fair, Cam, on the MPs themselves, I think they do want to listen. If I could, even though I was a former MP, we do want to listen. It's just that the job has become so intense, so full on. You are chasing your tail. So that's a reason, not an excuse. But it's just so busy that those deep conversations don't happen. And I'm sure many people who turned up to select committee, they get their little 5 minutes to discuss a major issue, and then we're on to the next and the next and the next. So it's the system isn't working as well as it could.
Even though they had their 5 minutes, they often go away feeling they weren't heard.
Oh, exactly. Which is sad. And look, having sat on those select committees at times, you try to listen, particularly when you're doing like all day hearings. You imagine literally starting from 8 a.m. till 6 p.m, 5 minute after 5 minute. I mean, eventually it's just all swirling. But I have no doubt that people would have sat with me across the table doing my best to listen, but at times I would have zoned out and they would have picked up on that. And that's unfortunate. But that's probably the structural problems we have in the system. But on the flip side, if I might, I won't mention the MPs or the particular bills or discussions. But, there were times both in government and opposition where, in particular, my Labour colleagues would say something really profound. They would have seen something, and it happened on my national colleagues as well. But I do remember a couple of times where you're debating a topic in private and select committee, and they had a really profound insight, and it makes everyone stop. So there's still great dynamics that happen, but MPs are just overwhelmed, and it's maybe that's a discussion for another day of how we fix that.
Yeah, I mean, just on the select committee thing, often you see contentious bills before the House, and you look at the submissions, and there'll be thousands of submissions against the proposals of the bill, and very few in support of the bill, yet somehow the select committee comes to the conclusion that this is what the people want, and so we're going to press on regardless. And a classic example of that is the firearms legislation. The people who were most affected by that were effectively ignored. There was thousands of submissions against it. There was plenty of submissions that proposed a better way to do things. The government pressed on with their draconian laws around that haven't been effective. We've seen a proliferation of gun crime because the only people who were affected by the gun laws were law-abiding citizens, and criminals aren't law-abiding, so that weren't affected. So we had a proliferation of gun crime. We've got hundreds of millions of dollars being spent to put in place a register, which has never worked anywhere in the world. Canada tried it and spent nearly $1 billion before they decided to destroy it. The Australian one doesn't work at all. We're already seeing now with the register in place just astonishing anomalies because of a lack of experience in the register, the people who are in the register, and we're seeing guns that are being registered with model numbers as serial numbers and all sorts of nonsense like that. I mean, I can remember at Antique Arms getting Mike McElwraith to come along and speak to the 200 members of Antique Arms, and somebody said, well, what if a firearm doesn't have a serial number? And he said, well, it must do. Well, sorry, Mike, but Serial numbers didn't come into force until about 1899 with industrialization. Almost all guns before that were handmade. In the ones that weren't handmade, like say Martini Henrys or something like that, there was no need for serialization, so they didn't do it. And he said, well, all you need to do then is put the largest number that's on the gun and use that. And we all laughed. We just all laughed at him because, like, I've got 10 Martini Henrys, right, of various different models. I collect them. And the largest number on the side of all of those is the date of manufacture. So I might have 5 Martini Henry rifles with 1887 on them. And they're in the register as a Martini Henry of this caliber with this serial number with 1887. And if I've got 5, there's another 200 out there that have got 1887 on the side of them as well. But that's the ludicrous nature of this tunnel vision thinking that occurs with the formation of legislation for ideological purposes.
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, someone who loves history, the Martini Henry is a very famous ex-infantry weapon for the British, of course, very famous in the movie Zulu, amongst other things. But no, you're right. I mean, it's a good example of how governments of the day, and again, it goes across the political spectrum, make a policy decision and they just push on through. Sometimes a select committee, or rather the submissions into a select committee and the select committee itself can change the trajectory of a law, but it's very, very rare. And a lot of that, for listeners to understand, comes back to what we discussed at the start, which is the notion of unity. So, if Minister X puts forward an idea or a policy, the select committee, which, by and large is dominated by the governing power, if the select committee puts out a contrary opinion, that's sort of seen as scandalous, and all of a sudden the government of the day is caught up in a media firestorm about why the minister said this, but the select committee did that. And so it doesn't tend to happen as much as it probably should. And it's unfortunate because by and large what you see, and it's a deeper problem in our democracy, that so I'm not hesitating for any other reason how to articulate it quickly and simply, that basically a government decides its policy, very little changes. It just goes through the system.
There's a psychological term for it called concrete thinking. Once they've made a decision on something, they press on full steam ahead. We're not willing to entertain any changes whatsoever, even though the actual subject experts are saying if you do this, it's going to do that, it's going to cause this problem. And we're seeing that now, particularly on firearms law, particularly on some other aspects of law. Euthanasia is another one, where people were warned what the unintended consequences of this legislation was going to be, but they did it anyway. And now you're starting to see those consequences start to raise their head, and everyone going, well, why didn't they see that? Well, they were told, And so, I don't know how we fix that. There's this rapid fire legislative, vigor that they want to pass as many laws as they can, when actually we should be saying, well, no, for every law we pass, let's try and get rid of 2 others and actually have less laws. Wouldn't it be better if we had less laws?
I think so. I mean, all the grammarians at the moment are screaming, by the way, Cam. They'll be going, fewer laws, fewer laws.
Probably. I don't care.
No, I don't.
They might be saying that, but I bet you they didn't get 95% in their school exams for English, because I did.
That's right. Yeah, I always have to be careful when I do my writing. I will always get 1 or 2 people message through and point out all my grammatical mistakes.
If that's all they've got to complain about, then there's really not much wrong in the world, is there?
That's right. I think we are over-legislated in New Zealand. It is one of the reasons why MPs are incredibly stretched. It's easy to say, but it's quite true that MPs are overworked, and the amount of legislation going through is part of it. And it's hard to consider all of it. Exactly how you change it, that's going to be really, really difficult. I mean, part of it is, I think, looking at the way we structure the electoral system. But again, that's a whole big topic for another day.
It's a whole other topic.
But it does need to change, because otherwise we're just going to have, as I mentioned about halfway through this, we just have amendment bill after amendment bill, and we should always remember that an amendment bill is there because something has gone wrong.
Yeah.
By and large. Something wasn't done right the first
Something
time.
wasn't thought through properly.
Exactly right. And look, there's always going to be situations where it doesn't matter who submits or what MPs think, we miss things, but it's just happening more and more frequently. And again, a big part of it comes down, government of the day, be it red or blue, decides this is the trajectory, and it's very difficult to shift that. And media plays its own part because, again, it attacks aggressively if there's any change, where we should allow fault. Governments shouldn't be absolutely pilloried for going, you know what, we thought about this a bit more and we decided we didn't have it quite right.
Yeah.
Almost impossible for a minister to admit any fault.
I can't remember a single case where a bill has gone through the select committee and the select committee has said, yeah, no, we don't need to do this. I cannot remember a single case. Okay, on individual members' bills, that may be the case. But when a government is putting up a bill, it invariably goes through all of the stages in as smooth a way as possible, depending on how important that bill is to the government.
Look, absolutely. There are, though, a couple of, and I won't remember the specifics, but I'm pretty sure in the last Parliament, one committee didn't actually write a report. So the Select Committee just returned the bill as it was to the government with no commentary. So that was quite a bold statement. And again, I apologise to you and your listeners. There was another example, I think it might have been in Foreign Affairs, where they did push back quite hard. I think it was on the mass arrivals bill, actually, that Michael Woods was pushing through, that both Labour and National MPs united unusually to say this is just not good at all. But again, it just keeps being pushed on through. And the sad thing, Cam, for me, is that the focus often through media becomes on the supposed scandal, not the substance of why. In other words, the focus was not saying, well, why are the MPs pushing back? The story was, oh, the MPs are pushing against their minister. Is this showing disillusionment? It's like, no, that's the sideshow. What's the substance? What's the real, why are the MPs concerned? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're pushing up against time now, Simon, and it's been a real pleasure having this chat with you. What many listeners don't understand is that my sister actually tried to challenge you in the
She
event,
did. I wasn't
right?
going to mention it.
I'm happy to mention. Why I'm mentioning it is you've got every reason to not talk to me, because of something my sister did. But yet we are having a discussion for almost an hour. Which has been convivial and pleasant and an exercise in learning for the both of us. And that's just to show them, the listeners, that we actually can, even though we may have differences of opinions, familial connections or, all those sorts of things, that we can actually sit down and talk with each other. And that's the important thing. And I guess that's the thrust of the whole discussion that you and I have had today, is the need to continue to discuss things.
It's the absolute critical part of it, actually. I mean, as humans, we can find a myriad of reasons to be disgruntled and want to silence people. We need to pretty much ignore those, actually, and make sure we sit down. And I would always make the argument, you sit down more with the people you disagree with. I want to be clear, that's not the basis of our discussion today. It's actually quite convivial. But, when we get pushed on issues that are really deeply important to us, that's the real time to sit down and have more conversations. So, no, Cam, thanks for the chance to chat. Regards to your sister as well.
Yeah, I'll pass those on. And it's been great chatting with you. And I think our listeners are going to learn a thing or two about Simon O'Connor, and that's a great thing.
Thanks so much.
So now we know. You see, when politicians cease being politicians, you get the unvarnished truth. The MPs were muzzled by the leaders of the parties during the protest and told not to go and speak to the protesters. It's good to know. I found this interview, however, absolutely fascinating, and I think Parliament is poorer for not having Simon O'Connor in the House. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
RCR is on a mission to revive honest media. And now you too can be an integral part of it by joining the RCR Foundation Members Club. Receive exclusive benefits only available to club members, including your own backstage pass to join the hosts for interactive behind-the-scenes discussions, along with our all-new daily curated news summary, RCR Bites, that's delivered to your email box every morning, keeping you on the pulse of the news that matters in just a few minutes per day. To find out more, visit realitycheck.radio/members to see how you can join the mission that's making a difference.
Now it's time for Cam's Buddies. This week we'll find out what they think about the failure of the Serious Fraud Office cases and whether or not they think it was election interference. My producer has them all lined up and ready to go. Let's go now to Cam's Buddies. Welcome to Cam's Buddies, Miles. Good to have you back on the show.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Cam. And I think Winston's having a good afternoon too.
Yeah, the news came out that the Serious Fraud Office has lost a third case, this one against New Zealand First. Of course, they lost the case against Jamie Lee Ross and the National Party in the donations, and same with the Labour Party donations. Now they've gone 3 strikes and they're out. Do you think this is a case of election interference by the Serious Fraud Office?
Well, it's hard to look past that. I remember when they were first charged, the media went into a bloodlust feeding frenzy, thinking this would be the end. And, I mean, I remember thinking, there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And I kind of wonder whether lawfare is the new weapon that is being deployed against some of the smaller parties.
Well, that's sort of what we're seeing in the United States against Donald Trump, isn't it? There's these ridiculous lawsuits with activist judges and various different law enforcement authorities that are conducting lawfare, so because they think it's going to, affect Donald Trump's prospects of being re-elected. And we're starting to see this creep into New Zealand, in particular with the Serious Fraud Office. And they're a statutory organisation that's supposed to be fair and impartial, but it certainly looks to me like they're trying to fit up political parties, shoehorning criminal charges into what are really Electoral Act offences with much less penalties. I mean, they were trying to put these people in jail with their cases.
It's appalling. And, I highly commend Winston and New Zealand First for fighting this because they've won. Now, honestly, there needs to be some sort of recognition that Winston and New Zealand First have been dragged through the mud with these charges. And, no matter what happens, if you fling mud sticks. And I can think of a number of journalists who were particularly delighted themselves in flinging handfuls of mud. And, it's actually proven that the editors got together and decided, oh, no, we're not going to say anything about New Zealand First in the lead up to the election. So we've got that. That's already a fact. We've got these court cases that came to nothing. That's a fact. When are people going to realise that Winston, despite all of this, and New Zealand First, despite all of this, are in government, and I believe Winston's doing a great job, and I think that New Zealand First and Shane Jones and Casey Costello, man, that's a group that's hard to beat.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about the media. They gleefully reported all this. They jumped all over it. Nary a mention about the Labour Party donations, prosecution. Were gleeful about seeing the demise of Jamie Lee Ross and jumped all over the National Party. It seems to me the media are selective in how they produce this. It's interesting, on Tuesday, the news came out at 11 o'clock. I was on Twitter about 11:05 posting the judgment. It wasn't until several hours later that we started to see the mainstream media catch up with the news. Just an appalling editorial slant that's going on here. And the media, along with the Serious Fraud Office, have inserted themselves into the political process and tried to affect an election outcome that they didn't want. They didn't want New Zealand First in there. And in 2020, it worked. They were out. And, this was the only thing that hamstrung them. Came within a whisker of being re-elected. If they hadn't had this news from the Serious Fraud Office or announcing it in the middle of the election campaign, then they may well have got re-elected and we might have had a different outcome in 2020.
Correct. And whose head needs to roll for this? I mean, who is going to bite the bullet and resign because the Serious Fraud Office got it so wrong? My gut tells me nothing will happen. Well, that's just an appalling lack of responsibility. And I call on the head of the Serious Fraud Office to do a mea culpa and offer his resignation forthwith, because this is a whole disgraceful episode that needs to be nipped in the bud here in New Zealand.
Well, I actually think something will happen, because the very people who are victims of this appalling prosecution and gerrymandering attempt by the Serious Fraud Office and the media are now in power and are in the positions where they can appoint or de-appoint or unappoint these people in these positions. And so there's a delicious irony there. I can imagine the next cabinet meeting is going to be just incredible with Winston Peters on the warpath.
There needs to be certainly a few sackings. And listen, it's not just limited to the Serious Fraud Office.
Oh, no.
In my belief, I think there needs to be a little bit wider net cast, and there needs to be a few more people who need to have the Don't Come Monday card handed to them.
Yep, exactly. All right, Miles, I better let you go. I know you've got another thing to go to. We'll talk again next week. Have a good Easter.
Thank you, Cam, and go Winston.
Yeah, all good.
Okay,
bye. You. Good afternoon, Lindley. Welcome to Cam's Buddies. And boy, have I got a topic for you to discuss tonight.
Yes, what is it?
Well, it's about the New Zealand First case that the Serious Fraud Office appealed, trying to overturn the judgment in the High Court. And the Court of Appeal has told them to go fly a kite. But it rather raises the question that back in 2020, when they first prosecuted the two gentlemen from New Zealand First, that was this election interference on behalf of the Serious Fraud Office, or who actually benefited from New Zealand First being bundled out of Parliament as a result of the negative news that swirled around because of this?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll have to shake the cobwebs from my memory on this one, because it was a wee while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This, how long does it cover? We've got, what, 3 cases, or?
Well, there's 3 cases.
Am I right
that the Serious Fraud Office prosecuted National Party people, including Jamie Lee Ross, and they lost that case. They then appealed some of those aspects of it and lost that case. They also prosecuted some Labour Party people for donations and lost that case. And, of course, there's now this New Zealand First case, which happened, in 2020 and probably caused New Zealand First to be bundled out of Parliament to the benefit of Jacinda Ardern. So this is 3 cases where the Serious Fraud Office has looked at Electoral Act offences and didn't charge any of them with Electoral Act offences. In fact, they charged them with Crimes Act offences, saying that they defrauded people, but there were no victims and nobody complained. So, I have to think there's political interference here somewhere.
Well, on top of all that detail, the other point is the SFO had 2 cracks, didn't they? And so it was not once they had a go, but twice. And I think that each time it was near the election campaign. I think 2020 and 2023 were sort of they were slotted in so that they had a really influential effect on the campaigning for the election. That was my opinion of it.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. The 2023 appeal was announced by the Serious Fraud Office again in the election period. So,
Exactly.
there they are again, and they've just lost that, of course. Here we are 6 months later, and they lost that appeal at great expense to the two victims of this misfeasance from the serious fraud offence.
Yes, I know, that's absolutely right. But, of course, they think that they've achieved, or they thought they would achieve their end goal, didn't they? That was the thing. It's really good news that they have failed.
Is this a case of the deep state operating against New Zealand First and Winston Peters?
Well, I think it is, and I sort of touched on that on our last conversation. This stuff starts way, way, way up the top, and I think most of our listeners actually know that. And they're never going to give up on Winston Peters. He's sort of the Trump of New Zealand. They like to persecute him and make an example of him and make us all feel like we're scared out of our socks because look what they can do to, people in power. They think they're scaring us as well. But I don't know. I think this went from complaint to the Electoral Commission to the police to the SFO. Who put the complaint in?
Well, that's right. I think the Electoral Office put the complaint in. I think they took it upon themselves to say that there was a fraud on somebody, but no one was defrauded. Nobody was deprived of money. It echoes the Trump case of where he's been charged with fraud in New York. No one lost any money. There's no victim, and yet somehow Donald Trump was prosecuted. We're seeing the same thing here, aren't we?
It's an absolute mirror case, in my opinion. There's no doubt that it was politically motivated, none at all. And I remember the ructions in the racing industry, which is something I'm involved in. I remember people claiming they'd never donate or vote for Winston Peters ever again. They were absolutely furious on it. And, of course, although Winston Peters wasn't actually the person charged, it was cleverly constructed to fall upon him. And the media story, as I recall, read very badly. It was trial by media. And they ran a political soap opera, really, for absolutely ages. Now, to my surprise, the media, which I think was RNZ, actually named wealthy donors, the amounts given, and where that money was even lodged. I didn't think that was actually allowed, but they printed that in great detail, and they ran it like, really, it ran like unchallenged evidence of fraud in every detail.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly right. They named and shamed people for daring to participate in democracy by donating to a politician or a party of their choice. And that was what it was designed to do. It was designed to starve New Zealand First of support first, and secondly, starve them of money. And I think it's outrageous that these forlorn prosecutions, of which they've lost every single one of them, seem to be going unpunished.
Well, I just hope that New Zealand First has a crack at them over it. I really do, because they're completely out of order. And, this branding Winston Peters goes way back, and this is a perfect example. And they miss no opportunity in adding paint to their untrustworthy brand that they'd created in Peters. Yeah. And then they were able to tout fraud, everybody thought it was true. And I think that the prosecution said that Winston Peters could be viewed as an uncharged conspirator, a damning statement.
Exactly. I mean, that's activist judges who are going against the evidence. They're putting their personal political views into judgments. It's just appalling.
No, I didn't think those things were allowed. I really didn't. And, they've just gone for his jugular all the way through. And yes, it did affect his ability to campaign, and the other thing that the media have never, ever printed, to my knowledge, was the reason that New Zealand First went with Labour.
Well, yeah, exactly.
People just think that, he was just untrustworthy, so he jumped the ship. But as far as I know, National was very, very tardy in negotiating with New Zealand First and wouldn't give them anything that they wanted. And they thought that they had New Zealand First by the throat. But they took on a very surprising move and jumped to Labour, which I think is the last thing that Bill English expected.
Well,
but Bill English
has never been Bill English has never been a strategist, Lindley, to be fair. I mean, he was a great finance minister, but he's never been a good political strategist.
No, well, that's a perfect example of it, but that's why it happened. It wasn't a case of Winston Peters, it was a case of his whole caucus, and they couldn't get what they wanted at all.
Yeah.
So that's never been printed to my knowledge, but it may have, and I may not have seen it. But hey, the quote of the decade goes to Judith Collins, doesn't it, of National, some time ago when all these court cases were flying around the place, and she thought that Winston Peters was going to be charged. She said, and you remember this one? He was on his last legs and the National Caucus didn't want a bar of him.
Well, I think that famous last words, but, I think that Winston Peters should be playing tub thumping again from Chumbawamba often because, they knock him down and he gets right back up again.
He certainly does. Has that charge ever gone ahead?
No, of course not.
The band?
No.
No.
The band doesn't exist anymore, and the intellectual property rights sit with Sony. Does Sony really want to take on the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand over basically a song that everyone had forgotten about, and Winston Peters made famous again? He's actually increased their revenue and their sales, so there's no harm, there's no damages, and it would be a hilarious court case. And of course, Winston Peters' longtime friend and lawyer, Brian Henry, would be delighted to take a defence of a copyright issue. He's an intellectual property barrister who knows the law inside out. And I know personally, I had breakfast with him last week and he was laughing his head off saying, I hope they do come after Winston. It's going to be a fantastic court case.
Oh, it's just absolutely unbelievable, isn't it?
Totally.
It's
totally unbelievable.
Absolutely unbelievable. But they'll never change.
No, it's a travesty, though, that the media and the Serious Fraud Office inserted themselves into a political debate trying to affect the outcome of an election. And in 2020, they were successful about that.
They were. They absolutely were. And it's absolutely a miracle that New Zealand First got back in this time. It took a hell of a lot of work to get them in because leading up to near the election, the media were running all these horrible things in the paper, that really did read badly. They did it again. I don't think they had a court case against them.
Yeah, we've actually got Mark Jennings from Newsroom on record as saying that the media all got together and were discussing whether or not they should cover Winston Peters at all because they didn't like his politics, they didn't like him, and they really questioned whether or not the media should cover him, which is an appalling indictment, and I don't think he realised what he actually said. He said the quiet bit out loud, really.
No, they're half-baked as far as I'm concerned, but that's the way it is. But anyway, thanks to all the people that could see through it, New Zealand First did get in, and I think they're very lucky they did because, David Seymour's got some things that he has a firm stand on, but between Christopher Luxon and himself, there's a lot of stuff that they would not have stood up for.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's kudos to Peter's negotiating skills that they got what they did get through in that coalition agreement.
And now National has to honour those agreements, just like New Zealand First has to honour them, and the ACT Party has to honour them. And it's up to the news media to hold the politicians to account to ensure that those promises, those agreements are delivered. It's not up to the media to insert themselves into the debate. It's up to the media to hold all political parties and politicians to account for the things they said. Another example of that is Chris Hipkins telling us that they got it wrong on ram raids and violent crime in the streets, and they should have acted further. But no media sits there and says to Christopher Hipkins, well, hang on a second, both you and the police minister, Ginny Anderson, at the time, gaslit the entire population and told us that there actually wasn't an increase in crime. It's just that they had better reporting of it now.
Oh, well, does anyone believe that? Certainly I don't, but the trouble is the mainstream people, they sit there and watch the 6 o'clock news and soak all this up, don't they? Mm-hmm. It's absolutely disgraceful, but they're not going to change, Cam. The media are not going to change. They're on an agenda and they're not going to get off it.
Well, the only way they'll change is if they get smothered.
Oh, I think they'll be down the street, won't they?
Well, I hope so.
Will they be doing media? Yeah.
Yeah,
anyway,
one can only hope.
I must say before we go, there's one thing that does make me very, very sad in all this, and that is that John Clark eventually died. That's our Fred Dagg. Remember Fred?
Yep, very famous observer of politics and what was going on. And even when he moved to Australia and he started doing his own comedy things over there, just very perceptive about the goings on in politics. And I had a lot of respect for John Clark. You did right.
Can you imagine an item by him today here?
I know. He would just destroy them. He was a pleasure to watch what he was doing. Good old John Clark. Yeah. All right, Lindley, sorry. Thanks for your call, and we'll talk again next week.
All right, Kev. See you later.
Thank you. Bye, Lindley.
Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, Paul. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
Good afternoon, Cam, and happy Easter to you.
Yes, happy Easter to you too, and I hope you're going to do a bit of flying and get some rest and relaxation over the Easter break.
I may fly down to the beach and we'll have a lovely time with the family, I think.
That sounds delightful. Now, I've got a bit of a tricky one for you today. You might have heard the news on Tuesday that the Serious Fraud Office failed in their appeal against the two men from New Zealand First over the donations, obviously having lost in the High Court. They've now gone to the Court of Appeal and they've lost that. And on top of that, they also lost the case against Jamie Lee Ross and the National Party donors and the Labour Party donors. You have to start wondering whether or not the Serious Fraud Office were inserting themselves into the political debate and trying to affect the outcome of not one but a couple of elections.
Well, when they did it the first time, I think they actually were probably quite successful because right at the beginning, I think in the 2020 election, the information of taking Winston Peters and the party having a Serious Fraud Office investigation against them may have affected the way people voted. And I'm thinking that was it some politics that they learned from the US, or was it just the way just bad timing, bad luck? I mean, I see Winston Peters said to himself that he thought it was similar to the FBI leader who was throwing up investigations at different times right at the key moments of an election. And I wonder, the fact that they've lost the case, that's pretty bad and a waste of our money. But also, New Zealand First lost as well because they would have had to pay a fortune in legal fees to make the win or the lack of loss come to a point. But also, they didn't make it into Parliament in 2020. And I think there might have been a bit to do with that. I think that they were either egged on or there was a whole lot of media involvement in that, and the media seemed only too happy for that to occur. And then when you lose a case, and I don't know how many of your listeners have had a case brought to them by the SFO, but I imagine those that have, it's no fun to even be charged. But when you win and they lose, then you wonder at their thought processes. But then if they go and appeal their loss, so you get another round of it. So it's like you've been punished by the SFO because of the amount of money that you have to spend to get a second situation found not guilty, and then a third, and then multiple of them, and then they change to the foundation of NZ First and then to specific people. And all this seems to be to me just vindictive behaviour, because when you lose, if you made a mistake, that's one thing. But if you were directed to this by someone, and mostly the Serious Fraud Office, they don't normally attack because they don't have the thought processes, I think. And I think if you're an SFO person, you don't strike me as particularly bright. I've got to tell you that because I've had the SFO investigate me in the past, and they were just wrong. They were just so wrong, but they were led to it by someone who was very annoyed with me, and so that they pushed them into the direction and showed them some information that wasn't 100% of the information. If they had 100% of the information, they wouldn't have bothered. But the pressure that it occurs and the things that happen in well, it's not like a court. Well, even though it is a court, it doesn't seem like a court while they're doing the investigation. A lot of it is no fun, and it costs you not an inconsequential amount of money to be found not guilty. And then they say stupid things like, "Oh, we just didn't have the evidence to convict you." Well, good, eh? Yeah. That's hardly the spirit in which these things are intended. And then with that happening to Winston, and then some of the folk in the trust or the foundation, I just thought that was an absolutely vindictive effort. And now that they've been proved not guilty, and no one in the party's guilty, and no one in the foundation's guilty, I'm thinking, how ridiculous is that?
Well, there needs to be some penalties, doesn't there?
Well, there does need to be. But my understanding is they went with the wrong charges. If they would have charged them with something different, they might have had more success, but there was no victim of the crime. And for the things that were charged, you need a victim. Well, when there's no victim, it's hard to say, oh, well, these guys have misrepresented or misappropriated money, but there's no victim. Well, hello, something's wrong there.
Well,
and when it happened to the National Party...
It's exactly what they're doing to Trump, isn't it? So that's what they're doing to Trump.
Exactly.
They've convicted him of fraud when there's no victim and there was no fraud. You know, how does that work?
And also they've stated beforehand that they'll go out of their way to get him at different times. Well, hopefully our political system isn't that bad where the SFO can be aimed by a political group at somebody and they do this, but they do need to pay somehow for the damage that they've done, one to a party and two to the country, really. Like, had New Zealand first been in government for the 4 years from 2020 to the 3 years from 2020 to 2023, a whole lot of things might have been different. And
it would have been a whole lot different.
I mean, like that handbrake that they would have applied, and the reason that often Winston Peters sees, even though he seems to have no problem in my view, when he's on the wrong track and someone points it out to him and he thinks about it and he's convinced that what they're saying is correct, he will change. And it was exactly what he did, because he was quite pro the vaccine and pro the mandate until he got more information. And then he changed his stance on that. And then next thing you know, we see him down at the protest in Wellington. And I'm thinking, well, that's a person that when they get the information that's available, they change to the direction, that is correct and accurate.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, but they've made a strategic error that these sorts of noddies that are in these government departments, like the Serious Fraud Office, they don't seem to have any sort of understanding of consequences. But the people that they attacked are now in power and are the ones that can decide whether the Serious Fraud Office continues to exist in its current format, or perhaps maybe they should be, merged with the police and have their powers reduced, or even apply something like other countries have, where there's a director of public prosecutions, where they, instead of just willy-nilly going to court and prosecuting people, they have to actually present their case with all the evidence to a director of public prosecutions, who then sits there and says, look, yeah, I see what you're trying to do here, but yeah, I think that's forlorn, and best you just drop that. And maybe we need to have some sort of mechanism in place that stops the police or the Serious Fraud Office from pursuing actions like this, which had, honestly, a forlorn hope of ever succeeding.
Yes. Well, also, if whoever made the decision to have a go, did they lose their job, or they just have business again on Monday, and they've cost a group of people millions of dollars? I mean, it cost me a fortune when they had a go at me, and I imagine if what Winston Peters I've heard him saying in the media, it cost them $4 million to defend all this litigation that has been directed in their way. And they've also attacked some fine people whose name are suppressed. And I look at them thinking, well, these people are very reasonable people in life, and yet they've been attacked by this, and they seem to me to be great citizens and people that we're proud to have in our community, never mind having them being attacked by the likes of someone from a serious fraud office who's perhaps a bureaucrat at best.
Well, a bureaucrat who doesn't understand the law. But what's worse, though, is that the barristers that the Serious Fraud Office used, they've got KC after their name. They're supposed to know the law as well, and yet here they were prosecuting a case where they're trying to shoehorn Crimes Act offences, into a forlorn case where there was no victim and no crime, and we know there's no crime because it's been overturned in the Court of Appeal. It was they lost in the High Court, and this isn't just one case. Remember, this is 3 cases. This is 3 cases where the Serious Fraud Office heroically tried to charge people with Crimes Act offences, essentially of fraud, when they're only Electoral Act offences, which give you a censure or a ticking off with some strong words. But they were trying to put people in jail,
Well, what I think is interesting there is a KC, in my mind, is, $500, $1,000 an hour, and you give them work to do, and if their meter's running, they're happy to receive the work, regardless of how inept the charge or how likely to succeed or fail it is. They don't lose any money. Their meter runs per try, not per success. Now, if they were paid by successes only, it would be a completely different idea. But I don't blame the KCs, because that's just a business decision. Here comes government with hugely fat pockets giving out money like an octopus, and they're saying, oh, yeah, I'll have some of that. It's a forlorn hope, but what does it matter to me? If I get 1,000 hours of work at $1,000 an hour, give us $1 million, we'll call it quits.
What about the media involvement in this? I remember the media back then were pronouncing New Zealand First as guilty as charged, and smearing them with all sorts of ludicrous claims, particularly Radio New Zealand and Stuff. They were the main instigators of all of this, and they were trying to out donors, to shame them into not giving money, and smearing the New Zealand First Party and Winston Peters along the way. They involved themselves in this process as well.
Well, the news media and those that you've mentioned, in my view, seem very much like they want to be the news rather than report the news. And as such, they would like to say they made this happen and they made that happen. And I think even getting political scalps would be something that they would feel that they've actually achieved quite a lot in their business day. But what they've actually achieved is 5% of the public that care politically once the election has occurred, and 95 could care less. And so they're trying to preach to a very small audience who actually knows quite a lot about politics to be that interested, and the rest could care less, and they're not interested in hearing almost any of the woke drivel that the mainstream media seems to want to put upon us. And attacking Winston Peters was definitely the flavour of the day from what I was watching. In fact, attacking anyone on the right was the flavour of the day, and I didn't even view Winston as being on the right, but he was being attacked because he was speaking against the government in a number of different forums.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that, and the media should hang their heads in shame too. There's not a shred of humility on their part for saying they got it wrong. They should have reported the facts.
I think they'll be hanging their heads in no income. before they get too much older.
Yeah, well, that's the
and
way.
I don't say that like I'm happy. I say that like that's a terrible thing that they've actually inflicted upon themselves. It's like own goal after own goal. And now that the government of the day is in power and the people have spoken, there's no trough for them to drink at quite the same level, which is why I'm sure that they were very keen to maintain that so they could have the, what was it, some media
Public
fund.
interest journalism.
Public interest journalism, absolutely. I mean, hello, let's pay you to say what we want you to say.
Well, we all know
safe
that.
and effective to start with.
Yeah, they don't know that what they did is aim the shotgun at both of their feet and blow them off.
Well, it does seem obvious to. I mean, I'm not a political tragic. I just keep abreast of things, but it does seem to me like that. Well, many of the things they were saying at different times, I was thinking, well, that'll have a sequel before we get too long. There's never a government that makes 4 terms, so that will all change soon enough.
Exactly. All right, Paul, thanks for calling into the Crunch, and we'll talk again next week.
Very good. Take care and have a good Easter. Bye for now.
Okay, bye. Welcome to Cam's Buddies, Jack. Good to have you on.
G'day, how are you?
Oh, fantastic as usual. Missed you at lunch on Monday, mate.
Good. Yeah, I know. A legit reason.
I'm sure there was. Everybody commented, where's Jack? So you were missed. But anyway, I've got a bit of a conundrum for you this week. You might have seen the news that the Serious Fraud Office lost the 3rd case that they had against various political parties, this one being the New Zealand First one. Now, they originally started this case or announced it in the middle of the election campaign in 2020, which could have possibly affected the election result in 2020, which saw New Zealand First bundled out of Parliament. And then in 2023, they announced the appeal that they were going to have in the election campaign period as well, which they've now lost. And I'm starting to wonder, are these people politically motivated?
Of course they are. They're also very stupid.
I can't argue with you on that one.
Do you remember that bloke that was head of the FBI? I think his name was James Comey or something like that.
Yeah.
And he came out and announced that he was going to investigate Hillary Clinton just before the election. How do you think that sort of favoured her chances? This to me is just exactly the same.
Exactly. But what we're seeing here is that this is what's particularly galling about this case, all these cases in New Zealand, is that the Serious Fraud Office didn't charge these fellows, all these people or political parties with offences under the Electoral Act. What they did is they turned the law, criminal law, inside out and upside down, and tried to charge these parties and people with essentially fraud, that they were deceptive and defrauding somebody, but they couldn't say who they defrauded because the donors weren't defrauded. They willingly gave money. None of them said they wanted the money back. The political parties got the money, so they weren't defrauded. The Electoral Act says that there was no fraud here, but what the police went ahead and charged them under the Crimes Act with these charges of fraud, and it echoes what's happening to Trump in the United States, where in New York they charged him with fraud, but there's no victim, no complainant, and the loans that they say he defrauded the banks with were all repaid with interest. So we got this Americanization of officials inserting themselves into the political debate, and I don't think we should tolerate it.
Well, those that think that this is a squeaky clean country where everyone's very nice and honest are fooling themselves. Corruption exists at a high level.
Yeah.
I've witnessed it myself. I know for a fact, but what do you do?
Well, you got to speak up and say things. That's why we have, radio stations like Reality Check Radio, so that we can actually say these things out loud that nobody else is saying, but they're all thinking.
Yeah, well, I've just said it, but
yeah, but you and I and Paul and the others on the buddies, we're all people who are fearless. We're all prepared to say what we think, and we do. And if people are upset about that, well, that's too bad. We've got some more opinions that they might not like too.
what people would get upset about what we say? Who are these people?
I think mainly politicians, because we speak the truth.
Don't get me going. It's depressing thinking about it.
Oh, it's better than watching the news, isn't it?
It is, I guess. What news?
Yeah, well, that's all going to disappear from
I often think I've
TV3
died
soon.
and been reincarnated. I keep hearing the news and I think, I heard that several days ago. Or maybe I died and I'm reincarnated and I'm hearing it again. But no, I mean, even stupid news is perpetuated. I can't believe it.
I know. It's
They're
like
just making up stuff to fill spaces.
Yep, exactly. 100% agree with you, Jack. All right, well, we'll talk again next week, I think. And thank you for coming on The Crunch.
Okay, see you, Cam. Take care. Bye.
See you, Jack. Bye. Have a great Easter.
Thank you. You too.
Good afternoon, Jimmy. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
Hello, Cameron. What do you got for me this week, mate?
Well, you might have seen the news on Tuesday where the Serious Fraud Office lost their third case, the case against New Zealand First Foundation in the Court of Appeal. And Winston's obviously cackling and laughing as hard as he can because he's defeated the Serious Fraud Office yet again. But it rather begs the question, are these
motivated attacks?
Yeah, exactly. Are these politically motivated attacks? And should we tolerate having an activist organisation like the Serious Fraud Office that announces prosecutions and appeals in the middle of election campaigns?
Well, they were trying to bring Winston down. That was obvious at the time, and now it's been chucked out. It's good to know the judicial system works fairly.
Yeah, I mean, it worked in 2020, though, didn't it? It worked in 2020 because Winston was bundled out of Parliament.
Well, to be fair, 2020 was a pretty crazy election where, the Labour Party getting over 50%, just sucking all the oxygen out of the, but it would be hard for a minor party to do a repeat, I guess, in that situation. But
yeah, I think so.
It's clearly Wellington is so politically biased, insane.
It's nuts.
That all the people that staff these departments are rabid lefties, and they do anything to. And I mean, look at Trump in Washington. It's exactly the same. All these cases, and he's just slowly chucking them out. It's just the government against these candidates, and they're using whatever powers they can try and use to either slow these people down or bring them down.
It's
I don't know what you do about it. Like, how do you? Yes, but. Fortunately, Winston's got a lot of cunning and experience, and the Don's got lots of money. But anyone else it'd be much harder for them to fight back.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be the director of the Serious Fraud Office at the moment because, of course, Winston Peters is in Cabinet. He's the Deputy Prime Minister. And a Cabinet meeting is going to be very interesting if they talk about the future of the Serious Fraud Office from now on, isn't it?
So now that it's finished and over and he's won, can they bring it up and he can talk about it fairly now? Is that correct?
No, there's still suppression orders in place, but my understanding of the case is that at least one of the people who was charged is likely to seek to have the suppression orders overturned so he can tell the story of it from his own perspective. So that'd be interesting to see what happens. But I know that I've seen Winston's press release he put out on Tuesday. It was very liverish and very hostile towards the Serious Fraud Office. And I can imagine him. He's a person who holds grudges for years. I can see him, but no one's beyond redemption. I used to go to war with Winston Peters all the time. I called him all sorts of terrible things. But,
I remember. I used to read the blog.
Yeah, and him and I get on really, really well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I'm picking that the Serious Fraud Office might actually get disbanded and merged into the police or something like that, or maybe the Ministry of Justice, where they certainly don't deserve to be standing on their own 2 feet.
Well, you just have to sort of metaphorically chop the head off it and regrow it with a different culture, right? So because it is quite good that it's standalone from the police. Because there might be a situation where they have to investigate the police. So it is quite good to have that independent fraud,
But are they independent? Because you think about it, right? The Serious Fraud Office reports to the Attorney General or to the minister responsible for the Serious Fraud Office. In 2020, that was a Labour minister. that they reported to. Who benefited the most from Winston Peters not making it back into Parliament? Well, the Labour Party benefited the most.
Well, as our politics becomes more partisan, we've seen such a decline of that, where people in Parliament used to act correctly no matter what was going on in terms of partisanships and stuff like that. But now you've seen the slow decline of that, eh?
Yeah, I think it's an unwelcome development to see this. But part of that, of course, is the involvement of the media, because they just ran the Serious Fraud Office's lines. They proclaimed Winston Peters and the New Zealand First Party to be corrupt. People said we're never voting for Winston Peters again. They said they were never going to donate to New Zealand First again. This was a political hit job from where I'm looking at it from. And if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Well, yep. I've got nothing good to say about the media. I'm glad to see them go broke. There's a lot happened on Tuesday. Did you see the University of Auckland had a apartheid sign, Cam?
Yeah, they had a sign.
A segregation sign? A
segregation sign.
Wasn't that a disgrace?
They said this is a quiet space for Maori and Pacifica students. If you had put a sign up and said coloured folks here, there'd be an outcry.
Absolutely. I just can't believe it. That's my old university. They email me asking for money all the time. They're going to get a big response next time. I just can't believe that that sign's real. I thought it must be a crank, but it's actually real.
It's real. And my understanding is there's 20 of such things at the University of Auckland. There's 20 of these safe spaces for Maori and Pacifica.
Well, our government need to look to make them financially responsible for their crappy decision choices. They can act like that if they like, but they can't have public money if you're going to act like that.
Well, I want to know why it's only Maori and Pacifica. Where's the safe space for Asian students, or where's the safe space for South Americans
India,
or Panamanians or whatever?
Well, that's because this stuff never works, right? It's only the biggest victim group. But I actually can't believe I've seen that sign in New Zealand. I actually cannot get over it.
Yeah, well, believe it.
It's a horror show.
So that's where the government needs to say, well, hang on a second, Auckland University, you get a large amount of funding from the government for education, for funding and for all sorts of things. You need to get rid of this segregation, this whatever you want to call it, diversity stuff. That needs to go. And it's all comers. We want universities to be a place of learning and free speech and all of those sorts of things. And this sort of nonsense needs to disappear. I mean, next thing they'll say there's going to be safe spaces for blokes who think they're women.
Well, they're trying to force men into women's toilets and force whites out of some spaces. It seems batty to me. Mate. Maybe I'm old-fashioned.
It's completely batty when you've got, blokes who are average athletes at the best, right? Get beaten by absolutely everybody in the men's thing, and then all of a sudden they grow their hair long, change their name to Martha, and start, entering swimming competitions and running races and start slaying all the women that can't compete with them because they haven't got the levels of testosterone or muscle building that's gone on for these clowns who seem to be mentally ill.
Well, that's true. So what I would say is that I'm disappointed. Like, I thought the voting into this government last year was like just such a relief, but we're still seeing loads of woke craziness.
Well, I don't think these organisations, particularly these government or quasi-government organisations like universities, have got the memo. And maybe we need to have, instead of a memo, a stout stick or maybe a brick in the forehead or something like that, so that they actually get the message, which is this nonsense needs to stop.
Because it was resoundingly voted out. Like, New Zealanders didn't want Arden or Hipkins prescribed politics and type of politics. They got chucked out, and yet it continues on at Auckland University and other institutions. How do we get the message across to them, Ken?
Again, I think a stout stick or some severe penalties where the Vice-Chancellor loses his job.
The only way to do it is
sack some people, gas a few of them, smother this sort of nonsense and call it out. I'm pretty sure Winston Peters is going to put something out on on X shortly about that sign. I can absolutely guarantee he'll say something about that.
Oh no, he's been tagged to death on it, so he'll come out with a devastating thing. I see X being pretty good on it, and yeah. So anyway, there's a lot going on, mate. Far out.
There is a lot going on. That's why we're here at Reality Check Radio, so we can give some of these clowns a reality check.
Well, you're doing a great job, mate. That's awesome.
Well, thank you for calling in. You have a good Easter and a nice break with the kids, and we'll talk again next week.
Okay.
Thanks for calling.
Thanks, Cam.
Jimmy.
See you.
Now, you see, my buddies can see through the media spin. They know the truth, and that's why I have them on the show, so that you can hear the truth as well. These are ordinary New Zealanders, and they never hold back. Tell us your thoughts on Cam's buddies by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057. And now it's time for the mailbag. So we've got a few comments about my monologue from last week. Karen says, hideous mainstream media reporting on Winston's speech. There was so much positive narrative in this speech, yet the pathetic mainstream media go racing off to track down a comment from a band that has been broken up for 12 years on the other side of the world in their efforts to discredit Winston. Great speech, Winston. You can look forward to more people abandoning the mainstream media. And Jan says, listening to Winston Peters' speech, very good. Go, Winston. Please stop the plan of 15-minute cities in Auckland and around New Zealand. Give hope to our children. Open the oil refinery at Marsden Point. And some feedback on my interview with Winston Peters. Critical request for New Zealand First to confirm we are independent of the international health regulations and the World Health Organization treaty that has many names and many hooks to control every nation. New Zealand is unique and we want independence as promised by New Zealand First. And Kingsley says, I enjoy your chats with Winston. He's definitely getting a raw deal from the decaying media. Less discussion about the media, please, as it's merely become a distraction itself. Marion says, excellent interview with Winston. Great to hear him calling people out and to hear him so relaxed. Thanks for setting the scene at the beginning for all those whose ears didn't hear Winston's clear delivery first time around. And then Louise adds, thanks so much for the interview where you engaged with Winston Peters. That is the first time in my life I've been able to listen to him as opposed to him being minimized and belittled. Prior to this, I had thought how he was being portrayed. There must be some truth to it. I now don't believe this. Through your interview, I have discovered an intelligent, articulate politician not afraid to discuss the realities of the world we currently live in. I'd already thought I wouldn't bother with the TV news bulletins and general radio station news again. Your interview with Winston and with RCR being my go-to information channel now has cemented that change. And Liz says, great hearing Winston Peters on RCR. Just listen to The Crunch. It would be good to hear him speak on the peace movement in New Zealand, as many younger people are not aware of the great people like Larry Ross, who achieved, continued by his daughter Laurie, which I've recently been learning about when New Zealand bravely stood up for its principles. What is our current policy? Well, it seems to be a bit of a taboo subject. We don't hear much about it rather than celebrating these historic landmarks and teaching our children's school this important history. Our recent decisions seem to be taking us in a new direction to that ethic. And Mike from Foxton writes, what an awesome chat you had with Mr. Peters. I wish I'd watched the AM program just to see the look on the faces of those twits. He is really a brilliant politician, and I'm so glad he is in Parliament. Do you remember when Mr. Luxon offered him the job as Speaker? Well, I bet Mr. Luxon is now glad he never took it. And I know it was a ploy to see if he would take it. But New Zealand First are making the difference to this coalition. I think National are actually glad to have a three-way coalition because they're getting the good feedback that is actually due to other two parties. If it wasn't for New Zealand First, there would be little for the government to be happy about. New Zealand First and ACT are the ones making any difference. By the way, your chat on the media was so on point. I can't wait to see the demise of all the state-funded media and see RCR as the true fourth estate. So I can say I told you so to all those bastards including my family. It may not be too far away with a bit of luck. And Indra says, I listened to your channel for the first time today, and I must say it was amazing to be able to feel the mutual respect between yourself and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters. He is such a great human being. I basically stopped watching the one-sided nonsense, hatred and biased reporting coming from mainstream media. The interview was so refreshing and peaceful. Not to mention hearing that you're from Fiji put a smile on my face. I was born in Fiji too. Please do keep up the good work you're doing. Much respect to you and your team. And Terry writes, I just listened to the replay of your interview with Winston, which was excellent. Thank you. So much respect for him taking the time out to speak with you and the listeners. He is certainly fulfilling his role as Foreign Minister, and it was nice to get a glimpse of what his role entails. I would like to hear more from MPs about their roles and how this contributes to the smooth running of government and New Zealanders. Thanks again, Cam. It's been a real eye-opener, your show, and I enjoy it immensely. Leanne says, this is for Cam Slater. Great chat with Winston. I love the media are getting a hard time. Great show this week. You're talking about Labour. As long as there is breath in my body, I will never vote for them again. I lived in Auckland for lockdowns and watched the Wellington protest. Never again will they get my vote. I have voted in the past for them. And Jeffrey says, just caught you guys talking to Winston Peters. What an awesome show. So simple and easy to follow. I'm impressed. I'm just a recently retired builder at 66 and I'm taking a bit more time to listen and understand our leaders. My whole family have stepped away from Labour. They've destroyed my country with that shitty word separatism. We hate it. We live in Taranaki and have some awesome, happy, productive Maori living here that are also stepping away from the racist, derogatory comments that have divided our country. Anyway, all the best and a big pat on the back for being a normal Kiwi. Take care. And we've got a little bit of feedback on my panel discussion with David Farrer and Simon Lusk about Chris Hipkins and the Labour Party. Graham says, methinks your colleagues are overlooking that the current government were mostly part of the last government. So expecting good to come from injury is misguided at best. The fact that the jabs did not stop me catching COVID or giving it to you should be of interest. And Brenda says, Cameron, surely Labour must know what we need by now. If not, they should not get in. Yeah, that's a good point. And Janet finishes off the mailbag to say, tell Simon and David they're in la-la land. Definitely not paying attention, re the ivermectin issue. I'm with you. The criminalisation of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine was an act of treason against people. Auckland lockdowns pale in comparison. In denying people the access to antivirals and vitamins C and D, they disempowered the people and prevented early intervention to arrest the effects of the virus in the early stages. I see it as an act of sabotage, and there are plenty more Kiwis who agree. And that's the mailbag for this week. Right, that's it for the Crunch this week, and what fun discussions we had too. Banksy is absolutely awesome. He's such a good mate. I love him to bits, and I really love chatting with him as he never holds back. Simon O'Connor was a real pleasure to interview too, and I'm really disappointed he's no longer in Parliament. Simon made some excellent points about how important it is to maintain discussions on difficult topics, and we should never tolerate people being silenced for their views. That's why Reality Check Radio exists, so challenging discussions can be held on difficult topics. You can keep up with all my shows and indeed all of our shows by using the RCR app. You can even use the app to stream live. And a big thanks to the team that puts all of this together each week and makes it all work. Been a real pleasure having you all back this week. I'm loving all your feedback and I'm really enjoying talking to so many people sharing their thoughts on politics, life, and everything in between. So a big shout out to you all and thank you for listening and having faith in me as we continue to explore this beautiful game of politics. Don't forget, email suggestions to inbox@realitycheck.radio for people for me to interview, and let's make this show the best political show in New Zealand. Now stay tuned for a repeat of Rodney Hyde's Real Talk coming up next, followed by a replay of Truth Speaker with Tobias Tahi. I'm looking forward to having you join me again next week for The Crunch with Cam Slater.
You've been listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater. Remember, you can check out the replays for today's show on our website at www.realitycheck.radio/replays. Tune in every Thursday at 4 p.m. for more with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.